that Parliament has made a proposal to this effect, I think we should proceed as the treaties allow us to do so. So, let's move on to the debate. So we'll give the floor first to Matti Maasikas on behalf of the Council. Go ahead, sir.
Grazie, Presidente. Honourable members, tomorrow and on Friday, leaders will meet in Brussels for a series of key debates in 4 different formats. In keeping with the spirit of the leaders' agenda presented by President Tusk, they are determined to engage more directly on politically sensitive issues. Brexit discussions will undoubtedly get the most visibility, and I will get to that in a moment. But there will be other important discussions for future work at the EU level I'll start with. The formal meeting of the European Council will be dedicated to security and defence, the social dimension, education and culture. As you know, leaders keep a close eye on developments in the field of defence to make sure that the political ambition is turned into concrete action. This approach has yielded results. I think it's fair to say that we have made more progress in the last 12 months than in the last 10 years. The most visible example is the launching of the Permanent Structured Enhanced Cooperation, PESCO, and leaders will mark the occasion when they meet tomorrow. Against the background of the recently agreed new proposals for further joint work, leaders will exchange views on EU-NATO cooperation with NATO Secretary-General Stoltenberg. They will also use the occasion to review other work strands, including the European Defence Fund and its European Defence Industrial Development Programme. The adoption of the programme regulation by the co-legislators is now a matter of priority. The Council's mandate has just been adopted on the 12th of December. Leaders will then turn to the social dimension of the EU, as well as education and culture. Leaders will adopt forward-looking conclusions in all 3 topics, building on last month's fruitful discussions in Gothenburg. The debate taking place over dinner at 28 will be informal, as per the leaders' agenda working method. President Tusk considers that a serious political discussion is needed to pave the way forward on the external and the internal dimension of migration. It will be important to look at what has and what has not worked over the past 2 years and draw the necessary lessons for establishing an effective and sustainable migration policy. There will be no written output from the debate, because the aim of the discussion is first and foremost to foster a shared understanding of the main issues ahead, as a basis for further work in the first half of 2018. On Friday morning, the heads of the 25 member states who have ratified the Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance, joined by the Czech Republic and Croatia as observers, will discuss the future of the Economic and Monetary Union and the Banking Union. The presidents of the Eurogroup, the Commission and of the European Central Bank will take part as well. The aim of the leaders' discussion will be to scope the priority issues on which work should proceed rapidly and to give a tasking to the Eurogroup and ECOFIN to follow this up. To facilitate an open and political exchange of views, there will be no written statement afterwards. And now I turn to the state of play of negotiations with the UK. After breakfast on Friday, the European Council will meet in its Article 50 format, that is, at 27. We are getting very close to sufficient progress on the 3 Phase 1 issues, thanks to intensive work in the past month. At the October European Council, our assessment was that sufficient progress had not been achieved and it was too early to move to Phase 2. Now I believe that we are there. The UK's new improved offer, which Prime Minister May presented last week, looks like a solid agreement, and accordingly, our chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, has presented a positive assessment for Friday's European Council. I would like to use this opportunity to thank the European Parliament for your work that has helped us to reach this point. This is a significant move from the UK, which I expect the EU27 leaders to welcome. On Friday, the European Council at 27 will adopt the guidelines with a view to possible transitional arrangements and on the framework for the future relationship. This, however, does not mean that we have finished with phase 1 issues. There is still a lot to do, and any further progress in next phase depends on full respect of the agreements described in joint report of the negotiators. Thank you very much.
Prima di dare la parola al primo vicepresidente.
Before I give the floor to Vice President Timmermans on behalf of the Commission, let me inform you, colleagues, that President Juncker phoned me saying that he couldn't be here today because he's involved in the negotiations for the preparation of tomorrow's Council meeting, particularly the Brexit aspect of it. So I now give the floor to Vice President Timmermans.
Président, Mesdames et Messieurs.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, we've seen during the course of this year that we in Europe have to work unstintingly to make progress on a day-to-day basis and to do better together. But we now see the results. The social rights are there, permanent structural cooperation is there, better governance of migration is there, trade agreements with Canada and Japan, and the conclusion of the first phase of negotiations on Brexit. 3 years ago, it would have been unimaginable that the 3 institutions, plus the 28 member states, could have proclaimed a social treaty in this way. And I think we've made great progress there. And I'd also like to recall people looking askance when we saw the sleeping beauty of defence cooperation coming awake again under PESCO. And nobody believed at that time that this could come to fruition, but now 25 member states have started along this path. The first project that we'll see in this cooperation will be cyber defence, common logistics, which have now been identified. The Commission has proposed a European Defence Fund to give a clear boost to research and development in common way for defence. And I'm very pleased that yesterday, just in time for the European Council meeting, leaders managed to reach a general approach on this proposal. Now the Commission will count on this House's support and will call on the Member States to put projects so that we can start the financing rolling for the start of 2019. These are some ideas that Jean-Claude Juncker and his Commission has been defending for years, but these are ideas that finally are actually being realized. The future of our Union is also the future of the Eurozone. Those two go hand in hand. They're two indissociable realities in German. Of course, the robust boost and the low level of unemployment helps our situation, and that's why it falls on us to make sure that Europe and the Euro be taken into our own hands. In specific terms, that means the economic sunshine that we're seeing at the moment, if you like, needs to be taken to our advantage. We need to make hay while the sun shines. And last week, a timetable was produced by the Commission to cover the main points of deepening the banking union, the capital market union, and the economic and monetary union. First decisions in June will be taken in Sibiu in Romania. At a summit on that occasion, we'll be looking towards the European elections, and important decisions will have to be made. The timetable should make sure that the euro will continue to maintain stability and yet at the same time will bring the countries of the EU closer together. That will mean that the countries of Europe will be stronger. In order to achieve that, it's urgent that the banking union be completed and make headway so that risks are covered and we mutualize those. We have done a great deal to reduce risks already. Banks in the Union have almost doubled their reserves, and the emergency credit lines are being reduced on a permanent basis. The Commission put forward additional measures to reduce banking exposure a year ago, and I hope that this House and the Member States will soon agree to all of those. With the package that was put forward last week, we also made sure that the backstop for the single resolution mechanism is now in place, which means that the Member States who have already agreed back in 2013 can finally get moving. As many of you, I'm also convinced that a common currency union can lead to the necessity to have a common deposit mechanism. And it is urgent that we complete the capital market as well, because a good, well-integrated capital markets don't just mean that risks are spread over private channels, but also it's one of the most efficient means to achieve a reduction in risk. Given the actions on the Economic and Monetary Union, we want to strengthen and bolster existing structures. We don't need to introduce new ones. It's not a question of a tug of war, it's a question of having more efficiency at European level. Looking at the European Stability Mechanism, we want to move this and extend it to a European fund in a different fashion, which will give us more leeway to act, and we will help ourselves if we support the Member States in their necessary reforms. And the Commission, therefore, is putting forward its own experts on structural reform, making them available to improve the markets, improve the social markets as well, but looking at the management of public budgets as well. This House has been demanding for a long time that the fiscal pact be introduced in law. If we don't do that now, then we will nevertheless make sure that national budgetary authority and solidarity needs to be brought to chime one in with the other. It's important that it's a great success for the EMU, and the more success we have there, the more prosperity and jobs will generate for people. And so on this particular question, I'm banking on your support. You are the Parliament of the European Economic and Monetary Union.
Will be critical in shaping our future. This is why I'm delighted that President Juncker, together with President Tajani and Prime Minister Ratas, will tomorrow sign a new joint declaration on legislative priorities for 2018. The joint declaration will help focus all our minds on the issues where we can make the biggest difference and show real results to citizens ahead of the European elections. Nowhere is this more important than in migration, an issue on the leaders' agenda this week. We need a comprehensive European approach, including much more than just border management and support to Africa, but also solidarity within the European Union and preserving the Schengen area of free movement. I firmly disagree with the statement that relocation as an emergency response has been ineffective. Over 32,000 people have been relocated. That is over 90% of all those eligible. Migration is an issue that will stay with us for generations, and we have to be ready for a possible next crisis. So let me be clear. All building blocks of our comprehensive approach are needed. Take one brick out and the whole edifice crumbles. Temporary internal borders may become permanent, with lasting damage also to the internal market. This Parliament has adopted its position on the Dublin reform. It is now time for leaders to unblock the stalemate in Council and strike the right balance between solidarity and responsibility. And let the treaty lead. What is up to co-legislators should be left in the hand of co-legislators and not so-called returned to member states. We will either find a European solution to the migration challenge, or there will be no solution. And only by getting the reform of Dublin done will we be able to get back to Schengen. This cannot be left on the shoulders of a few member states. Every single member state will have to do its measure and show solidarity to the Union as a whole. We must also urgently improve the conditions of migrants in detention camps in Libya. At the African Union-EU summit in Abidjan, leaders agreed to work in concert with the United Nations to save and protect lives of migrants and refugees along the routes and in particular inside Libya. I want to briefly mention the successful conclusion of the final discussions on the EU-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement. Last Friday, the negotiators concluded the talks for the biggest bilateral trade agreement ever negotiated by the European Union. The Economic Partnership Agreement will remove most of the €1 billion of duties paid annually by EU companies exporting to Japan. It will also open up to a Japanese market of 127 million consumers to key EU agriculture exports. It will increase EU export opportunities in a range of other sectors. With this partnership, Europe and Japan send a powerful message in defence of open, fair and rules-based trade. Now let's do the necessary to submit the agreement for approval to the European Parliament, to you and the EU member states, so that our companies and citizens can start exploiting its full potential before the end of the mandate of this Commission. Mr. President, with your permission, I would now like to pass the floor to Michel Barnier to enlighten us on the Article 50 negotiations.
Grazie.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Vice President. Now, indeed, let's hear from the EU negotiator, Michel Barnier, who's going to give us some details about the state of play in these rather difficult discussions with his UK counterparts. Michel Barnier, please.
Thank you very much, President. I would also like to thank Frans for having allowed me to take the floor to say something at the beginning of this debate during your part session, to say something about the extremely complex and extraordinary period that we've had of discussions with the United Kingdom, and to say something about the agreement, the deal that we arrived at last Friday. This marks a very important phase, and there are very many more stages and phases that we're going to have to go through. But we now have the so-called joint report, the detailed joint report running to 15 pages, that's 16 paragraphs, 95 paragraphs, and this is going to run through the very complex agreement that we have arrived at. And if the European Council heeds your resolution, then this first step, this first phase, will allow us to continue with the ensuing stages of negotiation in a far more serene way. We've also managed to guarantee the stability of our continent, because we are living through uncertain times, and this means that our union, together with the United Kingdom, has to be able to come up with rational solutions and at the same time be able to focus its energy on all the various initiatives and challenges that all of us together are going to have to face up to, and that Frans Timmermans has already referred to on behalf of the European Commission. We've also managed to send out a message of confidence to very many people, to very many actors, to very many citizens who are worried and rather anxious following the decision of the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. I must say that it has never been in our minds that to proceed to mutual concessions, that we've never wanted to have any concessions on the rights of our European citizens or on the peace process and stability in Ireland, nor did we want to make concessions when it came to the very many projects which are financed through the European budget using European monies. And this is a line that has always been shared by the European Parliament and also by the Council of Ministers. The agreement that we arrived at last Friday, as the Estonian presidency has said, obviously is going to has a lot to do with your continued support, honourable members. And Mr. Tajani, I would like to thank you, and a sincere word of thanks to your coordinator, Mr. Guy Verhofstadt, and the Brexit Steering Group. Also, Mr. Brok, Mr. Gualtieri, Mrs. Hübner, Gabriele Zimmer, Philippe Lamberts, the presidents of your various political groups, and also the chairs of the committees. And obviously I'm going to be continuing to work together with you, but I would like to thank all of you for your support. The main points of the deal, the agreement, and the main points that were fixed by your Assembly and the European Council Well, the idea is to try and guarantee sufficient progress, not 100% of sufficient progress, but sufficient progress which is precise enough and clear enough, which allows us to have a solid basis to be able to proceed with negotiations. And obviously, Frans Timmermans and the European Commission and its President Jean-Claude Juncker have already referred to just what all of this means. Last Friday, we were able to translate some of the points into far more detail in the joint report, and I think the conditions have now been met to be able to move forward. I can be very clear on the points that were included in this deal, this agreement. Honourable members, I would never have submitted this joint report as a responsible negotiator if I'd not been able to note that real progress had been made together with the United Kingdom to guarantee the rights of the European citizens and those who are project leaders that are already being financed, and also everything, the situation in Ireland with North-South cooperation. There is no going back on this sufficient progress. The progress has been noted and recorded and is going to have to be translated into a legally binding withdrawal agreement on each of these three subjects that I've referred to, and then the other points that remain to be negotiated and clarified. These obviously are prerequisites and conditions for continuing with the negotiations in a smooth fashion. And obviously, we are going to have to perhaps focus now on what were our shared objectives right from the outset, and that is citizens, the rights of the citizens. 4.5 million citizens that you represent have decided to live on the other side of the Channel or in the remainder of the European Union according to the one of the fundamental principles of freedom of movement. And obviously we have to guarantee, we have to preserve their rights, and that means that all European Union citizens travelling to the United Kingdom who travel to the United Kingdom, and UK citizens travelling to the European Union before the date of Brexit withdrawal are treated in an equal way and for life, that their rights are guaranteed for life. This means that any citizens from the European continent or from the United Kingdom that decide to live and work on the either side of the Channel can continue to do so. Their right of residence will be extended compared to existing rights. So if a citizen decides to return to their country, for example, leaving the United Kingdom or leaving another country within the European Union, then after an absence, maximum absence of 5 years, they will still have their rights guaranteed. The period is now only 2 years. A British citizen in any other member state of the European Union will not suffer the consequences of Brexit. Students will be able to continue to study, paying the same fees, and this will go for all European students studying in the UK. Nurses and doctors who, before Brexit, went to the UK or elsewhere, then they will be able to continue to work in their host country, and their rights will continue to be recognised and respected. And members of families can serve their right to be able to go rejoin their families after Brexit, either in the European Union or in the UK. All children will be protected, even if they are born after the date of Brexit. Citizens will maintain their rights when it comes to health services, pensions, other social security benefits, even if they leave their host country for another country in the European Union. And this is all to do with the portability of rights and everything to do with family benefits. And I would like to be very clear when it comes to properly implementing these rights. Regardless of whether we're talking about Slovak, Maltese, British or French law, it is the rights that are established in this agreement which will apply, and these rights will be guaranteed for life throughout the duration of the life of your citizen. There is should be no ambiguity on the way these rights will apply on either side of the Channel, and case law of the ECJ will continue to apply. We have to obviously take a look at the way we're going to be developing legislation in the future. And in the report, we have a specific reference to this, i.e. the question of rights of citizens and the way they are to be applied and protected. The idea is to have an independent authority, which EU citizens in the UK would be able to refer themselves to, as UK citizens can now refer to the ECJ, and the independent authority in the United Kingdom obviously will be further developed following the signature of the agreement. But then there is another problem when it comes to the citizens, EU citizens who are living and working in the UK at the moment, and this concerns the whole procedure of registration that the United Kingdom has demanded of those EU citizens living on their territory. This is a very sensitive issue, I know. This is an administrative procedure which is going to be necessary in order to properly implement the exercise of the rights of these citizens. But we have noted that one of the conditions, requirements for this administrative procedure is going to be incorporated into the withdrawal agreement and backed up by the necessary guarantees. As I said, this is an administrative procedure of registration for our citizens in a country which is going to become a third country on the 29th of March 2019 at midnight, or, well, just before midnight. The procedure that the United Kingdom is going to put in place needs to be simple, easy to use, based on objective principles with the same kind of guarantees that we have now, i.e. that EU citizens who are already permanent residents in the United Kingdom will be able to avail of this special status for free, without any kind of extra costs which are imposed on them, because we know there is a charge of £70 for certain documents. So this administrative procedure that is being demanded of the EU citizens, the various conditions, requirements, well, obviously we are going to have to guarantee that these are simple. This will be mentioned in the withdrawal agreement, which is going to be submitted for ratification. Honourable members, that we are not at the end of the road when it comes to citizen rights or some of the other aspects of an ordered withdrawal, and we are still very prudent, very cautious, and Mrs. May is aware of this, and obviously we're going to have to see how we now proceed on the basis of the results and the sufficient progress, how we proceed to further stages of negotiation. And if we get your consensus, and if the European Council on Friday deems that sufficient progress has been made, then on your behalf I will commit myself to starting the work on the final wording of the withdrawal agreement, and we can do this fairly swiftly on the basis of the joint report. We will then continue to negotiation on all the other subjects. We're going to have to clarify and further negotiate governance of the future agreement, the certain geographical aspects, the whole question of data, and then of course Ireland. And Ireland is going to be the subject of a specific negotiating path, because everybody, assuming their own responsibility, is going to have to work towards a specific solution for a unique situation. And in the European Council we'll also be taking a look at the details of the definition of the transition or period, which should be brief, but obviously we have to come to an agreement on this. So we have to have a simple architecture for this, and this will also cover the aspect of the ECJ. There will be internal preparatory work that will need to be done within the 27 member states together with you when it comes to our future relations with the United Kingdom. But already now I can say specifically and clearly that there are certain points which are non-negotiable. Integrity of the internal market, the 4 freedoms which are absolutely essential and the fundamental, the foundation of the internal market. And obviously we need to guarantee the integrity of the European Union, which the United Kingdom has chosen to leave. As of March 2019, the United Kingdom will become a third country. We want to, I think we share a shared objective to have good relations, and we know that the stage, the phase that we're moving into now is very important. There are very many more steps that need to be taken so that we can have an orderly withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union. We wouldn't want it to be disorderly at all. And I would like to thank you, President, and for your trust and confidence, and everybody else as well, but also thank you very much for the vigilance and keeping a close eye on how we're going to be proceeding.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Barnier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnier, for your commitment and the information that you've just given us in Italian. Now we move on to the debate, and we begin with political group spokesmen, and we start with Manfred WEBER on behalf of the group of the European People's Party.
President, ladies and gentlemen.
Published an opinion poll. 50% of the British people are in favor of a new referendum. The British people realize now that Brexit means losing many things but not gaining anything. I can only mention one example, which was an interesting one: the debate in the last days in Great Britain about the decision of the Commission that British cities cannot become a European capital of culture anymore. A very easy message that you can understand that the Brits will lose a lot. And on the other hand, dear friends, the European member states understand that sticking together makes all of us much more stronger. Dear friends, whereas I want to use Ireland as an example for this, whereas the United Kingdom could easily set the terms of the Irish-Anglo Treaty in 1921, the recent negotiations have clearly demonstrated that Ireland is today much more stronger because it belongs to the European Union. We all are Irish, that is the main message, and we Europeans have secured the Irish interest in the negotiations in the last weeks. I want to underline two concrete points. One is that in this first phase the idea was to create trust between Great Britain and the European Union. I have to say that the last statements from David Davids, what this outcome means now practically, was not helpful to secure this trust-building approach. So we ask the British Prime Minister to clarify till Thursday that this outcome of the first phase is binding for both sides and is a base for the future talks in the second phase. And for the second phase, dear friends, we are having a key role in the second phase. We decide finally about the Leave Treaty, and for my group one thing is clear, that we can only accept a kind of a transitional period if we have sufficient outcome of the second phase. Without the Leave Treaty there will be no transitional period. That must be clear for the next year, for 2018. Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, ich möchte noch auf zweite.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's a second topic I'd like to cover, because we are in December now. If we want to convince people in Europe of what we're doing, then we have to talk about our successes, as Frans Timmermans did today. So, ladies and gentlemen, 2017, a year that's passed, 74 legislative acts have been put in train. The Paris Agreement has been agreed on. We looked at the economic boost, CETA and other international trade agreements. Through those we've shown that we can build bridges. That's our intention, not destroy them. On defence, there are historic steps that have been taken in cooperation in the defence area. On the social union as well, we've seen progress. I think this is the important message we want to give to the citizens. We don't need debates in theory, we need solutions on the ground. And in recent months we've made very clear progress. For 2018 I want to say very clearly that the topic of border management is important. We need to show people in Europe that we can secure our own continent, especially from irregular immigration. Ladies and gentlemen,
Themen, die es meine Fraktion stark umtreibt.
the European way of life is something that really is important to us, especially in these uncertain times. So my third thought today that I'd like to put to you is that at Christmas time also, especially, I'd like to point out that our continent has Christian roots. 75% of European citizens are Christians. My group is proud of this Christian legacy that we see in our churches, but also in our traditions and in our daily lives. If we look at the fundamental structures of our continent today, the idea of solidarity, the idea of subsidiarity, tolerance in dealing with one another, many of these fundamental values would be unthinkable without the Christian Judeo history of our continent being brought to the fore. These foundations are ones we should be aware of. Even non-Christians, even people who reject faith, they will still be happy in the coming days and weeks that we have peace. And the fact that we celebrate Christmas in Europe, it gives structure to our year as well. And so finally, I'd like to say that for our group, these values are important. The foundation of our continent is something we should be fully aware of and should indeed be proud of. Thank you.
On behalf of the group of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, I give the floor to Gianni PITTELLA. Thank you, Mr. President. On the question of Christian traditions, today is St. Lucy's Day. The person who, let's hope, will be able to help our government see how urgent these decisions they have to take are, without needing to wait longer for the formation of a government in Germany. With Germany today, tomorrow it could be Italy, yesterday it was France. We've now got this dictatorship of the immediate, and the dictatorship of the immediate takes our view away from a more powerful Europe with a better governance of the Eurozone, with its kind of own finance ministry and an ability to manage migratory flows and people looking for asylum. Now the Commission has come up with a specific proposal. We wanted it to be more ambitious. We would have liked that. I'm talking about the EMU proposal. We think that the fiscal compact, that's something which shouldn't be simply watered down but built upon, but still it's a piece of good news as far as, for example, setting up a European Monetary Fund to help out states in difficulty is concerned. There should be specific decisions, therefore. But these decisions aren't happening because Council has to wait. President Tusk, move forward. Don't just give up when it comes to things like mandatory refugee quotas. Don't throw in the towel. It's your job to try and win over the member states, not throw in the towel. We need to move forward. We need to have a real European finance ministry, which won't simply be some kind of glorified accountant, but will actually have a budget line for it and will help various differing economies converge one with another and will be answerable to this Parliament. On the question of Brexit, we've done a good job. Thank you to the EP negotiators, to the steering group. I won't mention everybody, we know who they are. Thanks to the European Commission. Thanks to our chief negotiator, my friend Michel Barnier. So let's not miss this opportunity. And now I address the UK government. That's enough with these statements like the ones made by David Davis, who said that this agreement is just a statement of intent. Does that same thing go for the Irish border issue? Prime Minister May needs to explain to the people in her governing coalition. Mr. Barnier has said that there's a lot of progress that's been made with protecting the right of UK citizens and EU citizens and their families at a time when many people are talking Europe down. Europe has shown that it's almost like a parent, guaranteeing rights and protection for its citizens. It wants to do the same thing. In Northern Ireland and the Republic, they're realising now the importance of Europe as something which helped bring peace, and workers are worried about issues relating to social dumping and environmental dumping, etc. Europe, the European Union, is still a force for protection. Let me end, President, speaking about the joint statement from the three institutions. As Vice President Timmermans reminded us, there are positive elements in this declaration. It's partly brought about by our initiative in the Socialists and Democrats group, but we are not happy about some points that are not there: social issues, economic governance and own resources. I'm aware that that's not the Parliament's fault. But once again, the Council. It's the Council that's holding everything up. And these priorities, which aren't there, should be part and parcel of a powerful political initiative over the next few weeks, the next few months, involving the European Parliament. Thank you, President.
A nome del gruppo.
On behalf of the European Conservatives and Reformists, Mr. Kamall has the floor.
Thank you, UKIP. That's all right. Any time. Thank you very much. After last week's talks, we are finally looking to the future and no longer just looking back at the past. And I think this is a positive step for all of those involved. I know that there will be people on both sides of the English Channel who may not have got everything that they wanted. For some, what was agreed was too much. For others, it will never be enough. But for so many of us in this chamber who know the everyday realities of trying to find a deal, we know that where there is compromise, there are concessions. I believe that the important progress that we saw last week was made when both sides sought to avoid a no-deal situation, when both sides understood the need for flexibility, and when both sides focused on building a better future rather than looking back at the past. And I'm aware that within this House there are a large number of people that hoped for a different result to the June 2016 referendum in the United Kingdom, including from my own political group and from my own country of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And amongst those people are friendships I value and opinions I greatly respect. But my message to them is simple. Brexit will not change our common interests in trading with each other and with the rest of the world, in sharing intelligence to tackle terrorism and crime, in cooperating on security issues to keep our citizens safe. I was in Latvia a few weeks ago as they celebrated the 98th anniversary of the British Navy helping the Latvians to defeat the Bermont West Russian Army. And the Latvian politicians I spoke to stressed the importance of looking to the future and continued military cooperation with the UK through NATO. A future where the UK continues to work with individual European nations, as well as continuing to work with the European Union as a whole. A future where the ECR group and the members sat behind me will continue to be a voice for a reformed Europe, a voice for those who believe in free enterprise, free and fair trade and competition, a voice for those who believe in the freedom of the individual, personal responsibility and greater democratic accountability, a voice for those who believe in respect and equitable treatment for all EU countries, new and old, large and small. I hope that last week the British Prime Minister and Donald Tusk laid the first foundations for the journey ahead. A future where the EU signs a mutually beneficial trade agreement with the UK as one of the world's largest economies, but where we both make the case for open and free trade. A future which reduces the burdens on businesses, allowing them to create jobs, growth and prosperity in all our countries. And a future where both the EU and the UK cooperate where we have common challenges to build a better future for all our citizens. I just wonder whether I could just end on a personal note in response to Manfred's comments. Manfred, as a Muslim, I fully understand the Christian roots of Europe, but you must not confuse that with Europe being synonymous with Christendom. And when I see the lack of diversity in European institutions, you have a long way to go to make those who are not standard white Christian European feel comfortable in Europe. You need to do more work, and do not allow Brexit to blind you to that. Thank you.
Well done, sir.
A nome del gruppo della Lega.
on behalf of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, I give the floor to Mr. Verhofstadt.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, first of all, Mr. Kamall, when I hear you, I ask myself, you want simply to continue all the cooperations inside the European Union. Why for hell you want to go out there? Why for hell you want? So I don't understand that. So you say you criticize the European Union, and then you say, yeah, but we want to continue A, B, C, D. You go until Z. Okay, we're going to see, and I want also not to come back to other unfortunate statements, that of Brexit negotiator Mr. Davies. You know who called, I think that already Gianni said it, the agreement a statement of intent. I spoke to him yesterday on the phone, and he assured me that it is absolutely not his intention, not the intention of the UK government, to backtrack on their commitments. And I take note of that, and I think the best way, Michel, to secure this is that in the coming weeks we transpose all these commitments in the legal text of a withdrawal agreement. That's the best way to do it, and to do that not in the coming months, but in the coming weeks, when we start also the second phase of the negotiation. But talking about this withdrawal agreement, dear colleagues, especially on citizens' rights, there are three outstanding issues, I think, that need to be solved in the withdrawal agreement. And that are, first of all, the fact that the rights, the citizens' rights, are also granted to future partners. There is no reason why future partners of European citizens should not have the same rights as the rights that we have defined here. The second is that we want also full protection, dear colleagues, for the UK citizens living in Europe. That has been a point of view from the Parliament from the beginning. If one UK citizen living on the continent has a right of residence or a permit of work in one country, our opinion is that this permit and this right of residence is in fact valid in all 27 member states. That is our view. And I have to tell you, it seems to me, I have the impression sometimes that we care more about this than the whole British government for the moment, but that's not the problem, because it's our task as European Parliament to defend these citizens, if it be European citizens living in Britain, if it are UK citizens living on the continent. And then thirdly, if you allow me, dear colleagues, the concrete procedure. I think that Michel Barnier did a great job. All rights are protected now. Very clear, all benefits also. There is the word settled has been skipped because we are not settlers. The Europeans living in Britain are not settlers. That's very clear. That word has been skipped. But there is a problem with the procedure, and we need to solve it. And the problem is, the point is that apparently nobody seems to trust the Home Office. In every letter that I receive from Britain and from EU citizens, they are saying, yeah, all our rights are protected, but be aware that it is not a procedure in which we create an enormous administrative burden, in which the burden of proof is on the back of the citizen instead of on the Home Office. And I think we need to take that into account. I think that this Parliament can never give green light to the final agreement if we have not in the withdrawal agreement a simple procedure, a declaration, one form per family, cost-free, and where the burden of proof is on the Home Office and not on the back of our citizens. It are not our citizens who have decided for a Brexit and who can have the negative consequences in a burdensome procedure that is introduced here. And in our view, this is part and parcel of citizens' rights, because citizens' rights are worth nothing if they are drowned in a sea of red tape, if they are bogged down in rules and in regulation. And to make it more understandable, we will never allow, for example, that a European banker living in the city who has enough money to pay very important lawyers can make it, and a Polish plumber or a Romanian doctor cannot make it. That we will not allow. There has to be a proportionate approach in this. Like we all will be very keen, but Michel Barnier knows it, on the issue of Ireland. Ireland cannot become the collateral damage of Brexit, dear colleagues, and that we will never allow, and our solidarity with Ireland will always be full. We will always be behind Ireland in these negotiations. And finally, talking about solidarity, because that's a question of solidarity that we are behind all our member states and behind Ireland. Saying that on solidarity, I have to tell you, I was completely shocked yesterday by the paper issued by President Tusk, and I told it to the representative of the Council, issuing a statement and a paper in which she is mainly saying that the EU has only to assist the Member States, it's the Member States who are responsible for the migration crisis. Well, I think, and I'm echoing what you are saying, Mr. Timmermans, for me, the solution can only come from the European Union. And there will be no solution for the migration crisis. Is it not a European solution? And I mean a European border and coast guard to manage the outside borders. A European asylum package and not the Dublin approach with the negation, in fact, of such a European approach. And also a European economic migration policy. Let's make the European blue card the sole system of economic migration inside the European Union. And that is what we need, instead of a paper coming from Mr. Tusk who is undermining, in fact, the whole approach by the European Commission, and at the same time the whole approach of our rapporteur here in the Parliament, Mrs. Cecilia Wikström, who have worked hard to have an agreement here in this House. So let's go forward with European solutions, and the European Council has to show that it is on the same level as Parliament and Commission in this fight. Thank you.
For the group of the European United Left, Nordic Green Left, I give the floor to Ms. Zimmer.
Thank you, President. I would like to start off by picking up on that point that we've just heard. The letter that President Tusk sent to the heads of government, I think, is dreadful. Rather than talking about reallocation and trying to address that as one of the main problems, and criticising this as one of the main problems of European refugee policy, then and trying to do something about altering our policy towards countries like Libya, what we should be trying to do is help those people who are fleeing and who find themselves in these camps at the moment. But on the main point under discussion today, this is the report on Brexit negotiations. What we're doing here is carrying out a political assessment. There's nothing that right from the outset would allow us to say, well, this has now been decided once and for all, and that this is now going to serve as the starting out point. Essentially what we have to do now is put all of this into a legally binding text, and taking a look at everything that has been agreed now, we have to verify all of this, because we still have concerns and doubts about all of this. And the behaviour of the UK government over the past couple of weeks has not really instilled trust and confidence, because we have the Good Friday Agreement, which has never really been properly recognised, and we've seen the behaviour of the DUP, the way they've acted here as well, and so there is all of that has to be bear in mind, and this is going to be a decisive point here in the European Parliament. On the basis of our resolution from April 2017, we're going to say that we are going to be assessing the results, the outcome next autumn, in autumn of 2018, and that's on the basis of that we'll be giving our agreement. We feel there is a need to act to negotiate on citizen rights. Obviously, we're very concerned about family reunion, families being able to be kept together. We're thinking about the future of the children, the future of possible couples in the future. We want rights to be protected. We want full recognition of professional qualifications. And we want to guarantee the rights of people, guarantee their right to access to the health service, to the education system, to public services in the UK. We want to be able to guarantee the export of acquired rights. These have to be maintained. They cannot be watered down or reduced. And we want a direct impact on the withdrawal agreement in this area and the rulings of the European Court of Justice. 8 years has been referred to. We don't know whether that's going to be enough. If the UK government is not in a position to be able to set up some kind of body themselves, then we have to see whether we can have an extension of the period of the impact, the effect of the ECJ. And then, of course, we have the rights of all the citizens from the other member states. They should not be restricted. And when it comes to the new settled status of the EU citizens in the UK, that has to be linked to full enjoyment of rights. Anything that is derived from EU rights, this has to apply to all EU citizens. And what we also feel is important is that we keep an eye on the following. We have the impact of the case law of the European Court of Justice, and we have to see how that is going to be dealt with, and also looking ahead to a possible free trade agreement and how that would interplay with rights. We're not talking about future rights, we're talking about existing rights and standards. And here I'm talking about labour rights that apply to workers in the UK, because it's not a question of us just turning away and ignoring what's going on in this field. Ireland and Northern Ireland, we are under a full obligation. This is something that we have recognised the European Parliament to recognise the Good Friday Agreement that goes back to 1998. Obviously, there was a structural decision and various details. That's not what we're going to look at specifically. We want to take a look at the rights that should prevail. There should be no reduction of the rights that apply to the Irish on either side of the border, either those in Ireland or in Northern Ireland. There should be no watering down or reduction of the rights that they enjoy, and this is something that we're going to be insisting on. And I would also like to make it quite clear that as the European Parliament, we should take it upon ourselves to address the EU citizens in the UK and the people living in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Then also we have the UK citizens living in the European Union. We have to take it upon ourselves to ensure that their rights are respected, and we have to be the guarantor of the respect of those rights. Thank you.
On behalf of the Greens European Free Alliance, Ms. Keller.
Thank you. Well, actually, until some days ago, I was quite optimistic about this council, that there might actually be some steps ahead. You know, there were some positive developments, and well, I thought that doesn't happen so often, so I was quite optimistic. You know, on Brexit, there was a sort of agreement, even with some hiccups, but there was a step forward. On the Eurozone, there was some movement, and even on migration, there were some steps, you know, in the right direction, looking at the Commission, for example, and ECJ court cases. But then that didn't last so long. On Brexit, even though we had an agreement, then it was put into question in London, and that of course raises a lot of questions about any sort of agreement that we're making here, that you're making here with your counterparts. And I would say especially also about the future relationship, because if you can't trust one another, if you're not sure that whatever you agree is actually going to hold, then this is going to put a major strain on any future relation. I would also add, not just to the European Union, because if the UK wants to be a global player and find their new friends elsewhere, then that's going to be just as tricky, or even more tricky, because I mean, we're used to, or well, we have a long relationship, but others might find it even more bewildering if there's this untrustworthiness on the other side. So I hope this can be clarified. I mean, we will make a very clear deal, legally binding and everything, but I hope that this will not happen again in the future. Also, Northern Ireland, and colleagues have mentioned this, is of course a crucial issue, and one that really goes onto the question of peace and living together, and this is something that will remain in the main concern of our group, but I'm sure of colleagues as well. And there we haven't squared the circle yet. We all agree there shouldn't be a hard border and whatever, but that's nice, but it doesn't say yet how we're going to do that. Because we can't have the cake and eat it. We need to find a solution here. We need to find a solution. And there I'm with colleagues to say that to make sure that there is no a restriction of rights of Irish citizens and of people on both sides of the border in Ireland, that their rights will be safeguarded. But there is no solution yet. I hope we will have a proposal soon, but for us this remains the main issue, just as much as the rights of citizens. And yeah, of course, there as well we have some important progress, it has been mentioned, but there are also important problems that have been mentioned. The rights of future partners and spouses, for example. And also already now we all hear the stories of major hiccups with the administration, where residence permits are not granted in the way they should be. So this is something that urgently needs to be addressed. And then on migration, well, there again, and it has already been mentioned as well, the letter of Tusk I did find extremely irritating, because basically in the same time as the Commission stands up for solidarity, goes to the ECJ, also has earlier been making infringement procedures, basically the Council on Tusk comes and shoots the Commission in the back. And that, I think, is not a nice way to go ahead. And I think Mr. Tusk and also I think the entirety of member states, they will have to answer some questions here, like how should this be understood if Tusk calls solidarity ineffective? How should this be understood by the Commission, who was standing firm on the ground, by this Parliament? We have actually the same parties here in this House as are in the governments, as are forming the governments in the member states. We're not a detached, totally different galaxy. We're the same political groups, the same parties, but we have managed to find an agreement in the European Parliament on the Dublin reform, on the future asylum system. Sure, it wasn't easy, but we have managed to put forward an ambitious proposal. But apparently this is ineffective, this is irrelevant for Mr. Tusk. I do find this really irritating. And also, what about the member states, who have been calling for many years for more solidarity? What about Italy? What about Greece? But in the past was Malta, Spain. It could be Poland tomorrow as well. There is no guarantee that any member state will be spared, so to say. So I'm wondering whose president Mr. Tusk is here trying to be. And I hope that this will not be reflected in the leadership meeting. And I hope indeed that the co-legislators, or rather the other co-legislators, will make progress here, because we as Parliament have been ready for a long time. And I hope as well that the heads of state and government will have a look at what EU but member states also have contributed to the misery that we see in Libya, and also what they are going to do in order to alleviate that misery. And there I think just proposing 1,000 resettlement places to come to the whole European Union, that's really a meagre number, and I hope that the member states will add up a little there. Thank you.
On behalf of the group of Europe of Freedom and Direct Democracy, Mr. Farage.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever heard so little criticism of the United Kingdom in this chamber in all my life, and I guess that doesn't really take much working out, does it? Monsieur Barnier said earlier that there were key areas upon which he wasn't prepared to make many concessions. Well, you didn't need to, sir, because you were up against Theresa May, and she was all for making as many concessions as she possibly could, including agreeing a ludicrous bill of up to 40 billion sterling for us to have the right to leave, a continued role for the European Court of Justice, and in line with that, family reunions that mean, frankly, open-door immigration from the European Union is going to continue for years to come, and almost bizarrely, a commitment for ongoing regulatory alignment. It's as if, even though we're leaving, effectively the British government wants to keep us in some form of single market relationship. So I'm not surprised you're all very pleased with her. Theresa the Appeaser has given in on virtually everything. But as an observation in an exercise of power, it's fascinating. Whether we like or dislike the European Union, we can't deny the power that it's got, because you managed to make a British Prime Minister leave Downing Street in the middle of the night, fly to Brussels, to go and forge an agreement with unelected bureaucrats based in Brussels. I mean, it's a form of ritual humiliation which she was prepared to put herself through. She has danced to your tune all the way through this. You must be very, very pleased indeed. And now we enter into what perhaps may be the biggest deception yet played on the British public. She is seeking a transition phase. And there are one or two comments here about whether the Brits will get that phase. Well, of course they will, because we're volunteering to go on paying the membership fee, to accepting all the existing rules, all the new rules. We will effectively, once transition is granted, have left the European Union at the end of March 2019 in name only. And if that transition phase lasts up until the next general election, there is a real possibility that a new incoming British government stroke coalition could sign us up to the single market and the customs union forever. So I do understand why many in this place feel encouraged by the performance of our Prime Minister, and I can assure you increasingly millions who voted for Brexit are feeling frustrated, perhaps even now moving to the point of anger. It's the same story across the whole of the West. The aspirations of the people and the aspirations of our political leaders and class are in a very, very different place. I fear Brexit, at some point in the future, may need to be refought all over again.
For the group of the Europe of Nations and Freedom, Mr. de Graaff.
President, with regard to Brexit, I stress the sovereignty of the UK. And this implies no jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, no restrictions on free trade agreements, application of UK law with regard to EU citizens, and that are to us the central elements of any acceptable deal. Having said that, migration is again an important topic of the European Council meeting, and rightly so. Mass migration still threatens the survival of our civilization, of our security, of our culture. And these illiterate, illegal fortune seekers believe in the barbarism of Sharia, of Hadith and Quran. They come to the EU and still come with hundreds of thousands to benefit from our prosperity, and they do not contribute a single bit to our societies. They take without giving, and if necessary, by force. This has to stop. So I praise the governments of the Visegrad countries who stand for their own traditions, for their people and culture, and they lead the resistance against Juncker and Timmermans. They are the ones guiding Europe. Now, this is how you deal with illegal migrants. And first, no admission. And next, no incentives. And that is no housing, no social benefits, no family reunion, and no endless legal procedures. I also praise the courageous Libyan Coast Guard who set sail against aggressive human traffickers and rogue NGOs while risking their own lives. The Coast Guard of a country that was destroyed by France, the EU and the US now protects EU borders. The EU cannot show more clearly that it's utterly bankrupt. Schengen has to end now, and national borders must close now. Finally, the migrants who are already here must be returned straight away. Do not tolerate them. Do not pay them off. Do not send them back, but round them up and bring them back. So listen, Mr. Juncker and Timmermans, this is how you do it.
Today is a very busy day. There are a lot of speakers. At midday we have the hours of the Sakharov Prize. For this it's impossible to use the blue card. Thank you for your comprehension. Now, Mrs. Dodds, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Phase 1 agreement reached between the United Kingdom and the European Union is another step forward in the process of exiting the European Union. As a result of the strengthening of the text, there are clear statements that Northern Ireland will leave the single market and customs union along with the rest of the United Kingdom. There will be no special status. Northern Ireland's businesses will have unfettered access to the United Kingdom single market. there will be no internal trade borders within the United Kingdom. We share the goal of ensuring that there is no hard border between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. It is our view that these issues can only be fully resolved in phase 2 of the negotiations. However, the union that matters economically to Northern Ireland is the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, where trade is worth 6 times more than trade with the Irish Republic. Let us be absolutely clear. Northern Ireland's constitutional and economic stability will not be damaged by EU bullying in the Brexit negotiations. It is important that we now move on to the next stage of the negotiations. We should not miss the opportunity for a new relationship based on shared democratic values, trade and security. This would be for the betterment of all those we represent in this House. Thank you.
Merci, mes chers collègues.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brok now.
Präsidentin, Herr Ratspräsident.
Madam President, President in Office of the Council, Mr. Timmermans, Mr. Barnier. The fact that the Council is not just dealing with Brexit, it's also establishing an incipient European defence cooperation shows that solidarity and well-conditioned and defined economic and monetary union will also be discussed. The question of the social pillar will be discussed and progress is being made. And this all shows that the European Union is making progress. It's not just sitting waiting for Brexit. But ladies and gentlemen, on Brexit we must be clear. An agreement has been reached which we hear Britain is a supplicant, but it was subjected to the British government. The British government made commitments that has to be fleshed out in the withdrawal agreement, and the withdrawal agreement is a prerequisite for any kind of transitional period or any trade agreement to be concluded. So let us not beat about the bush. If Mr. Farage says that these are unelected bureaucrats, the only unelected party in his country is his own party. He doesn't have a seat in the national parliament. So what's he talking about national legitimacy for? I think Mr. Juncker has been elected. He was elected by the European Parliament. The European Parliament was elected by the European people. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to make it clear that in our relations there has to be confidence and trust. In these negotiations we've seen trust being built, and that shouldn't be destroyed. That trust is necessary so that at the end of the day we achieve a genuine agreement which for both sides will bring benefits. And that's why it's necessary that at the start of these negotiations the trust be maintained and we don't allow it to be destroyed by discussions in the UK. The European Union is strong because it's united, and that's why it will remain united. That's a prerequisite for success. Thank you, Mr. Gualtieri.
2 minutes également.
2 minutes as well.
Thank you, President. The progress achieved in the negotiation is an important success for Europe, and I would like to congratulate Michel Barnier and his team. We consider this a sufficient base to move on to the second phase. At the same time, we underline that any positive development of the discussion on the future relationship and the transition requires that the commitments defined in the joint report are fully and timely translated into the draft withdrawal agreement, including on Ireland, where full regulatory alignment means full regulatory alignment. And our final consent vote is conditional upon this. I am confident that this drafting exercise, and we will be vigilant on that, will ensure the goal that this Parliament has committed to achieve: the full safeguard of the rights of the 4.5 million of citizens affected by Brexit, and the full protection of the life choices that they have made. We are glad to see that, despite some propaganda by some Brexiteers, the joint report clearly states that all the rights established by the EU law and interpreted by the Court of Justice shall have direct legal effect through the withdrawal agreement, and that any inconsistent or incompatible rule, national rule, set out in the national legislation will be disapplied. And we are proud to have contributed, together with the Commission, to broaden the personal scope not only to all family members, but also to all future children. All this is very far from the original UK proposal of settled status, but this should not be seen as a success of one part over the other, rather as a common success for all our citizens and for all our common European principles. In order to be consistent with these principles, we will insist that the withdrawal agreement should cover both the future spouses and the rights of the UK citizens to move freely across the EU. And we will be extremely vigilant in order to ensure a really and simple and friendly administrative process that has to be declaratory in nature. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Mr. Henkel for 2 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I noticed a lot of schadenfreude here this morning. Mr. Weber was apparently enjoying the fact that there are a lot of negative economic effects on the British economy. But I would like to remind all of us here that Europe is suffering at least as much as Britain is. And I must remind Mr. Timmermans of the fact to map out a future trade deal with Canada or Japan is one thing, but to map out a trade deal with a country where we have relations since more than 40 years is quite another. There are a lot of logistical and sophisticated supply chains which are at danger. And ladies and gentlemen, I am fully obsessed with the disappointment that we are not losing only a good trading partner potentially, but we are losing 73 people in this parliament who have always been the advocates of freedom, of autonomy and of competitiveness. President Tusk last month said the following. He said there will either be a deal, there will be no deal, or there will be no Brexit. Ladies and gentlemen, and I think he is right, we have to stop two trains running on the same track against each other, because this is going to be a real catastrophe. Brexit is a lose-lose situation for both, for Britain and for the EU. And that's why I believe it must be Brussels, it must be Mr. Tusk himself who should try to offer Britain a new deal which avoids Brexit. Because in my strong opinion, Europe will never be a complete Europe, will never be a competitive Europe without Great Britain.
La parole est à Madame.
Ms. Inetveld for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually think Europe is not finished, but very much alive. I would like to thank Mr. Barnier for his efforts, and indeed progress has been made. But in my view, not sufficient progress, and that is why I will not support paragraph 2 in the resolution. However, I will endorse the resolution as a whole, as it is imperative that we avoid a cliff-edge scenario, and I think Parliament's conditions for the consent are crystal clear. But 3 key issues must be addressed. First of all, it must be clear that citizens in the UK do not have to apply for a status, but register or declare. That is key. Secondly, citizens should retain the right to bring cases before the ECJ. And thirdly, Brits in the EU 27 must retain the right to free movement, because, Mr. Barnier, British citizens today are still EU citizens. We represent their interests as well, and we have to secure their future as well. And finally, Mrs. May has promised to create, I'm almost done, Madam Chair, has promised to create a hostile environment, and indeed she has succeeded wonderfully well. Every day we get messages from people in the UK facing harassment, hatred and violence, and we hear the noises on that side of the House. Over 5,000 Europeans have been deported from the UK this year, so the UK government has a responsibility to create a welcoming and safe climate for people who have contributed to British society for many years.
Il faut conclure, Madame.
Could you wind up, please, Ms. Inetveld?
Vous avez une motion d'ordre, monsieur.
Point of order?
There we are. Got it. Point of order, ladies and gentlemen. We are not having any blue cards. This is a denial of democracy. They are trying to close down debate. They don't want debate. The establishment are trying to stop us having our say. This Parliament is not democratic. It's a farce.
Reprenons le débat.
Let's go back to the debate. Mrs. Anderson for 1.5 minutes.
The British government has done it again. They have pulled off a spectacular piece of theatre over the last week or so. No sooner did they get the Irish government and the EU Commission to acclaim sufficient progress than they immediately started to rubbish the joint report they solemnly signed. Only a statement of intent, says David Davis. We're coming to a gentleman's agreement with David Davis, who thinks nothing of misleading his own parliament. But it's no surprise. It's the way they do things. They create drama through late-night and last-minute negotiations. They flush out the bottom line of those they're negotiating with. They make promises necessary to get others to move things forward, and then they start to negotiate compromises downwards. They use ambiguity to confuse and disorientate their opponents, and then, when they don't like what the final compromise is, they simply ignore it and don't implement it. No one knows them better than us. The British government has been making promises to Irish people for years and then refusing to fulfil them. Even today, they are negating to implement the Good Friday Agreement, and that's an international agreement lodged at the United Nations. They are opposing rights that they signed up to, and they are allowing the most reactionary political party in Ireland, the DUP, to describe their policy on Ireland. So let us be clear. The resolution says that it must be fully enforceable with regards to Ireland. So when the joint resolution is turned into legal action, there can be no more ambiguity, no more contradictions, no more taking the British government as their word, because their word counts for little, as they care little about their word. Thank you all.
Madame, la parole est à Madame Yves.
Mrs. Evans, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. We have said from the very start that people must be at the heart of this process. I must protect the best interests of all my constituents in Wales, including those who have chosen to make Wales their home and have contributed so much to our country. I also have to protect the interests of those who have chosen to make their home in other EU countries, and it's unacceptable that people are still uncertain and anxious about their futures. The negotiations need to move forward, but not at the expense of citizens' rights. So agreeing progress cannot mean that all issues are resolved or closed. They are clearly not, and they need to remain a priority. This is not the final vote on this. There is a lot still to be done. Looking to the future for Wales and building our economy, maintaining access to the single market is critical to protect jobs and our agricultural industry, and that is what I will continue to do. Thank you.
Merci. La parole est à Monsieur.
Mr. Paksas, 1.5 minutes.
Pone pirmininkė, taip jau atsitiko, kad keletą pastarųjų.
Thank you, Madam President. The previous occasion I spoke, Mr. Juncker left the room. I hope that this time Mr. Timmermans will at least remain in the hemicycle to listen to my view and the view of colleagues. I've got a few questions. Do you agree with Mr. Schulz's idea that there be a kind of United States of Europe by 2025? If the answer is yes, do you think that states would enjoy the same rights? would you like to say harmonise salaries between Lithuania and Germany throughout Europe? Unity in diversity, or united in diversity, is that a principle that you don't like? How are we going to create these new United States of Europe? Would it be like in Catalonia, with people beating people up with truncheons, or like back in the Middle Ages? Are you going to submit these proposals to Council?
I can't believe that the Conservative Party, after all the years of wrangling over the EU, is now caving into Brussels. Why are we letting the odious Guy Verhofstadt dictate terms? He's only interested in one thing, and that's himself. As the EU moves to a United States of Europe, we should be looking to our oldest friend, our ally, United States of America. I was in Washington last week, and I spoke personally to Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of State for Trade, who said to me, "Don't take the poison pill that Brussels will offer you if you want to deal with us." And I agree with him. And then he said, "Otherwise they'll send in the EU army." And he thought he was joking. I said, "That will probably happen." Yes, and there is clapping in there for that, yeah, against the Democrats. At a time when we should be valuing our friendship with the US above all friendships, you're taking the poison pill. Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, instead of looking forward to a low-tax, low-regulation economy, co-signed a letter with other EU finance ministers to denounce Mr. Trump's tax reforms. How dare he? As a Remainer, he is totally trying to sabotage a US deal. In a few years' time, over 90% of world trade will be outside of the EU. Why is Mrs May shackling us to this failing bloc? Yes, business does need certainty, and that's why we should just walk away and move to WTO rules. Voters want an end to immigration. This deal doesn't do it. Voters want an end to the jurisdiction of the ECJ. But Mrs May has signalled another 8 years. This is unacceptable. Let's walk away. Thank you for your time, Monsieur Barnier, but it ain't working.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith, is this a point of order? Because we're not having blue cards. It's a point of order, is it?
Micro.
Could you turn your microphone on?
Well, merci bien. Colleagues, we're used to Mrs Atkinson's nonsense, but she really has crossed the line this afternoon, this morning. She referred to Mr Verhofstadt, our negotiator, as odious. I see she's nodding, so I would urge you, Madam, to apologise for that and retract that comment. Mr Verhofstadt is not of my political family, he's not of my political group, but your comments today are way beyond the line. We are used to your nonsense, but personal abuse has no place in this chamber. I urge you to retract that comment.
Nous allons reprendre dans la...
We'll move on in our debate. Mrs Atkinson.
Il n'y a pas de blue card.
We don't have any blue cards.
Vous n'avez pas le micro de toute façon.
You haven't been given the floor, so there's no real point.
Donc, comme ça ne sert à rien, je passe la parole à Madame...
So, I'll give the floor to Miss James.
Madame James, vous avez 1 minute.
1 minute.
Madam Chairman, well, how do I follow that, quite frankly, but I'm going to try. Now, the EU objectives throughout the negotiations have been very clear. 1, make the United Kingdom look as weak as possible internationally, and secondly, extract as much money as you possibly can from us. So, Mr Barnier, you've done a very good job. You certainly achieved that, and I take no pleasure in giving you that compliment. There's been gloating in the chamber this morning. There's also been lots of, quite frankly, misleading statements. But I'm going to ignore those, and I'm going to point out that the European Union would not be where it is now but for the United Kingdom joining in 1973 and contributing to the finance and international presence that you now have. So stop moaning about it and give us some, if you don't mind, recognition for what we've contributed. But the big fudge this morning, the stuff that you don't want to hear, the emperor's new clothes, if you like, is the fact that the migration story is not a positive one. The economic mess, quite frankly, that is still there in the background in terms of the European Union hasn't gone away. So please wake up, take a reality check and stop just focusing on Brexit in this chamber and get on with doing the job you're elected to do.
And Mrs Anderson,
Non, non, il
can
faut
I
conclure,
just
madame.
remind you one thing?
Madame, votre
I
temps
would
est
like
écoulé.
to see your MPs take their places in Westminster.
Merci. Votre temps
That
est
would be
écoulé,
helpful.
madame. La parole est...
Mr. Caspary, 2 minutes.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin,
President, 2017 was a very good year for Europe. Rather than 1.5 million refugees in 2015, only 150,000 came via the seas to Europe. We've had more employees with social security rights than in the past, and PESCO represents the first step towards a true European Defence Union. Yes, it is true that a lot of things aren't working well, that we could improve, but I think we've managed to show trust and confidence in trying to achieve common goals, and this has been seen in public opinion as well. 2018 is going to see a strengthening and deepening of the economic and monetary union, and I would like an increased budget for investment in anything that would provide European value added. A Commissioner for Economic Affairs with more powers. I'd like to see a strengthening of some of our principles so that we can have better heeding of country-by-country recommendations. And I would also like to have a currency fund which would also allow us to support various issues. And when it comes to the facility mechanism for non-Euro states so that we can help prevent crises, I'd like to see these kind of things developed as well. Gianni Pittella referred to Saint Lucia as the patron saint of good sight, and in January we also have the celebration of Mary on the 1st of January, who also supports us. We've seen that there are those who don't want to understand Brexit realities, but I think what they have to do, these people, is ensure that they heed St. Lucy and Honourable Mary, so that we can have a more successful year next year.
The second phase of the Brexit talks, some might hope that the UK government will be better prepared for this than it was for the first. But probably not. It has just admitted that there has not yet been a discussion in government on what final outcome it actually wants. It has also done no impact assessment on what it would cost to leave the customs union, nor on what it would cost British industry, agriculture or finance to leave the European Union. Even phase one is put into question. According to the Daily Telegraph, ministers only accepted the deal because they were told that points in it were, and I quote, meaningless, not binding, or simply included to secure Ireland's approval. Ministers have even said that the concept of keeping legislation aligned has no meaning in law, and despite agreeing on the outstanding budgetary commitments, Britain said it might not honour them. And despite Theresa May at last conceding that EU citizens in Britain and vice versa have rights, the deal still leaves them facing uncertainty. Whereas the deal on Ireland specifies that it must be upheld in all circumstances, irrespective of any future agreement, no such promise is given here to citizens, leaving them in limbo until the uncertain final agreement, unsure of their future status, unable to plan their future. Let's move on to the second phase, but do not pretend that the first phase issues are settled.
Monsieur Zile.
Mr. Zile, for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to see Mr. Barnier as the only responsible person still in this chamber. Whether it was the right move to divide the talks into two phases remains to be seen. And what David Davis said, nothing has been agreed until everything has been agreed. We know very well what this means here in the institutions, and this is the outrage that we heard about it is a bit exaggerated, I think. And for those caring for the Polish plumbers' destiny in the UK, but at the same time trying to push them out of the EU market with the mobility package that we're doing for the drivers. As for the phase 2, it is important to listen to the economic interests of the smaller member states as well, relating to the UK, and we cannot come to a situation where it is said to them, this is anti-European, so we will disregard your interests in the second phase. So this anti-European approach is also related to Mr. Tusk saying, or being able to say what is European or anti-European. So what did he do to the migration issue? All he said is that quota system is ineffective. Is it effective? In my country, Latvia, we have several hundreds of migrants coming into Latvia, and all of them have left Latvia with documents, without them, most of them going to Germany. So I would like to repeat that we are in a democratic system, and let's not arrive at a situation where someone in the Commission says what is European and what is anti-European. Thank you.
Mrs. Bearder, 1 minute.
Mrs May said one of her first goals is to ensure that citizens can carry on living as before. Others promised the same. Those Brexiteers who led us to believe they thought this all through and had a plan, well, that proved to be a lie, just like the one on the bus. The Home Office letters to EU citizens have threatened deportation. Brits in other countries haven't received assurances that they can retain all the freedoms they now have. Is it any wonder that people still feel anxious and terrified about their futures? I am furious for those who are left behind in limbo, and this agreement kicks many issues into the long grass. But this House is the voice of European citizens. They trust us to make the right call on this. We cannot and we will not turn our backs on them, and I certainly will not. But time is running out. We must get on with dealing with trade, the environment, science, digital, security, fishing, agriculture and all the rest. But there were 3 issues to solve before the next phase. Not 2.5, it was 3. For too many people, the future is still unclear. This Parliament must continue to demand action on our citizens' rights. Thank you, Madam President.
Madame Spinelli.
Mrs. Spinelli, 1.5 minutes.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President. In the Council's guidelines, they promised mutual guarantees which were non-discriminatory, could be followed up on, and were comprehensive on citizens' rights. And despite the progress that's been made, the preliminary agreement between the negotiators still doesn't reflect those guidelines fully. There's a lack of coverage for certain crucial rights like the protection for future family members and freedom of movement throughout the EU. The present characteristics of settled status run counter to the principles of non-discrimination and reciprocity to be given to European citizens in the UK. The Commission's talked about having possible analogous instruments in other member states, so that threatens to undermine European law, because reciprocity and effective implementation of rights are in danger if we don't make clear the role of the ECJ in all of this. It's true that important steps forward have been taken, but phase 2 of the negotiations needs to be used to fill in the large number of gaps that still exist. Northern Ireland, for example, and the protection of the full set of rights deriving from European law. It's not just a question of legal certainty, but in keeping the promise that nothing would change in the lives of millions of citizens. Thanks very much.
La parole est maintenant à Madame.
Mrs. Scott Cato, 1 minute.
Brexit is the zombie that staggers on, dragging distress and disappointment in its wake. The resolution we're debating today makes it clear that Brexit means losses on both sides. But there is a stark contrast in the way the two sides are approaching the negotiations. The EU side have a clear and consistent position, and they have sheltered the EU citizens who are their responsibility, protecting their rights to travel and work, and ensuring that the UK pays for the projects they depend on that we have already committed to in this budget period. By contrast, the UK negotiators have not been able to agree a position, a state of unpreparedness reinforced by the Chancellor's admission this week that the Cabinet has not even debated what they hope to achieve, and by David Davis's shenanigans. To constituents who feel let down by the negotiations, it's important to recall that we can still step back. This is why the Green Party is demanding a final say and a democratic choice between the deal as negotiated, with all the trade-offs and disappointments, and continued membership of the European Union.
La parole est maintenant à Monsieur Batten pour 1 minute.
Mr. Batten now for 1 minute.
Thank you. Now, on the 23rd of June 2016, the British people voted by a clear majority to leave the European Union. That decision was not conditional on any withdrawal agreement or any other factor. 18 months later, we still haven't left, and the leaving process is in a shambles. Mrs May is a Remainer. She leads a party and a parliament that sadly is made up of a majority of Remainers. They simply do not want to leave. Now, what Mrs May and the European Union intends is one of two outcomes: either to achieve a deal whereby we leave in name but not in reality, or to delay the whole leaving process until the next general election, when the referendum result can be set aside. Either way, the result of the referendum is being betrayed. Her Majesty's government should not be asking the European Union how it can leave. It should be telling the European Union how it is going to leave. Now, it will never be too late for a patriotic government and parliament to take control and make Brexit happen.
La parole est
The floor now to Mr. Annemans for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to turn to my British colleagues because, regardless of how Brexit goes, there's an interesting psychological phenomenon that we're seeing here in this chamber. Of those who will remain in the EU, there seems to be a tendency towards acceleration. And the pro-EU, the EU federalists, they are now tearing at a hectic pace forwards. Mr. Bellet, our good colleague here from the EPP group, said in a TV programme last week, "I'm pleased that they're leaving because they were a pain in the arse anyway," unquote. And of course that makes it very clear why people like Schulz, Macron, others are really got their foot on the pedal. We have to understand, friends, those who are staying, who are critics of the EU, we're going to miss them. I wish them all the best, but we will miss them.
Mr. Wolf, 1 minute.
Madam President, 537 days ago, the majority of British people voted to leave the EU. But for 537 days, we have listened to a rump of Remainers moan, whinge and cry about losing their beloved EU. For 537 days, we've watched a cabal of political elitists wage an anti-democratic campaign in the UK to delay, damage and deny Brexit. But at Christmas time, we are reminded that 3 wise men brought gifts to Jesus for a brighter future. And in that spirit, I offer 3 gifts to those Remainers in this chamber and beyond. The gifts of hearing, hope and a heart. Hearing so that the voice of those people who believe leaving the EU will make their lives better, brighter and freer is at long last heard by you. Hope that someday you accept the result and start to move on. And finally, a heart, because to those you have abused by calling old, stupid and ignorant for voting to leave, believe you do not have one. Happy Christmas and a joyous Brexit New Year.
La parole est...
I'd now like to give the floor to Mrs. Hübner.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, last week the British Prime Minister has managed to avoid a no-deal scenario, but the risk remains, and as there is still a long way to go. We are at the beginning of an arduous, complex, intensive process of drafting the withdrawal agreement, with a number of issues of relevance remaining outstanding. We are also ahead of transition negotiations, and the future relationship is still to be identified. The most difficult is yet to come. The transition period raises many legal issues which will have to be considered with the highest caution. It will have to provide for connection with the future framework foreseeable at that time.
And the talks on transition will precede the negotiations of the future relationship, so there is no reason to call transition an implementation phase. But transition is not only about bridging with the future framework, it has its own challenges. It is true that there is no time to negotiate a bespoke transition agreement, so its major part will be the prolongation of the acquis, but it only looks simple. We have to bear in mind that the EU acquis is strongly interdependent in a legally and politically complex way, and this is a challenge in itself. But there will be also parts of the transition deal going beyond prolongation of the acquis, and this will require, in my view, a strong, credible joint oversight mechanism with a strong role of the European Commission on our side. Thank you, President.
Mrs. Rodriguez, 1.5 minutes.
This is certainly the time for European ambitious solutions. But this is not the case for the joint declaration to be signed up tomorrow by the three institutions. It lacks this kind of ambition. And to start with, on the way to deliver the European social pillar, because we want to update social standards for all citizens, starting with young people in all member states. And for this, we need to have more powerful instruments to support convergence, real convergence, economic and social convergence. Take the reform package for the economic and monetary union. We welcome the fact that important movements will take place to introduce more democracy when it comes to accountability of the European Stability Mechanism. But let me be clear, if you want to have upward convergence, reforms are needed, but are not enough. We need to have stronger priority for investment. And this investment priority remains too weak in the integrated fiscal compact, too weak in the instrument to support convergence, too weak even in the so-called instrument to protect investment. The only way to have stronger priority for investment is to have an upcoming community budget with new own resources, supporting stronger future-oriented investment. And we need to do this, and we count on the Estonian presidency to deliver on this.
The floor now to Mr. Van Dalen for 1.5 minutes.
I remember, President, well, I think that, rather, Brexit's not going to happen. Brexit is harmful in political and economic terms for both sides, and we would see a shift to the south in the gravitas of the EU, and we can see that Mr. Macron is now talking about where Europe's going. Now, it's economically dangerous to have Brexit because the GNI of the UK will take a hard hit. Unfortunately, the European Union's rump will also take that hit in its economic power, unfortunately in my country as well. We need to have decent agreements. Even after 2019, we have to continue to work with each other in political and economic terms. There'll be a disruption. We have to try and keep that as small as possible. That's both in the interest of the EU and the UK. And finally, in 2016, millions of Brits voted in favour of Brexit. The result is not just to be laid at the door of UKIP or the tabloids. There is a feeling there that we have in my country, in the Netherlands as well. And our Economic and Social Office has come up with a report that there's a clear reduction in the support for Europe. And we don't want to continue in this headless race towards more EU.
Madame Harkin, for 1 minute.
Mrs. Harkin, for 1 minute.
Today's debate is helping to provide some clarity. Mr. Barnier, you were clear. You said there will be no going back and that last week's agreement will be translated into a legal text. Mr. Verhofstadt strengthened this by suggesting it should be done in the coming weeks, not months. And in regard to the second strand, Mr. Barnier, regarding Northern Ireland, again you were clear. You said we need a specific solution for a unique situation, and I agree. And while the issue of no hardening of the Irish border and the upholding of the Good Friday Agreement are crucial. The Agreement on Citizens' Rights is of fundamental importance to all EU citizens and to Irish citizens living and/or working in the UK, those who have lived there, and to all cross-border workers. But we need trust to continue these negotiations in good faith. Yes, we all recognise what political grandstanding is, but this process is way too important to be derailed by those who simply like the sound of their own voice.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam. Mr. Ferreira, 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The agreement for the UK to leave the European Union should not imperil the rights of workers or other social rights in any way. Which citizens currently enjoy in the UK, including right of residence, rights to non-discriminatory treatment, access to education, public services, health services, social security, and the right to family reunification and mutual recognition of academic and professional qualifications, etc. That's something which is not has not been done in the present stage of the negotiation. So any future agreement between the UK and the EU needs to bear in mind the unique characteristics of the various member states. Further, it can't stop the right of any state putting together agreements with the UK on the basis of mutual benefit and respect between peoples. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. I will be supporting the resolution this afternoon in the votes, and I do so with a sense of real sadness and not a little anger, both personally on behalf of the people that I represent. Scotland did not want this. Scotland voted against this. This is not in Scotland's name. But we do need, and I say it through gritted teeth, to move on to phase 2 of the negotiations, because for too many people in the UK, Brexit remains white noise, a false equivalence aided by an industrial-scale spin machine telling us that somehow we will have our cake and eat it, it'll be all right on the night because we're special, we're British. People need to see the detail, the line by line, the policy by policy, the nitty-gritty. People need to see what they're going to lose for Brexit to become real. And in phase 2, the promises of the shysters and charlatans who have so disgraced themselves in the conduct even today in this debate will be shown as what they are. A cruel deception on the people they claim to serve. This is the end of the beginning of this Brexit negotiation. I look forward to phase 2 where we'll hold them to account. Thank you.
Monsieur.
Yes, I have seen you. Don't worry, I have seen you. Mr. Coleman, go ahead.
Mr. Smith is not being factual. 40% of Scots voted against the European Union. That's a substantial minority, of which I represent. He is misleading the House by suggesting that Scots do not want to be in Britain or do not want to leave the European Union. That is absolute travesty.
La parole est à monsieur.
The floor now to Mr. O'Flynn for 1 minute.
Thank you. In my country, Manchester United fans still talk about the holy trinity of Best, Law and Charlton. In the EU, we have the rather less holy trinity of Juncker, Schulz and Verhofstadt, each supporting the creation of a federal superstate. Mr Verhofstadt believes the nations of Europe are dwarves that cannot prosper independently. In his State of the Union speech, Mr Juncker unveiled a raft of new integrationist plans, and Mr Schulz left this place to go around Germany stirring up apathy about a United States of Europe. If that's what you want, then fair enough, but do not affect to be surprised that the British people won't go there. Even a moment's reflection on our history and indeed our geography should tell you that. So you should let us leave the EU with goodwill. Instead, many of you seek to punish us, and it is that spirit of pettiness that will, in the end, destroy all your grand plans.
Yeah. Well said.
Hang on a minute.
Mr. Schaffhauser for 1 minute. Dear colleagues, the gentleman from the Council and the Commission we have two opposed visions of security and defence of Charles de Gaulle and de Nouer. A Europe with NATO, and we have the Elysee Agreement of the 2nd of January 1963, and we also have the Treaty of Independence, the Transatlantic Treaty, and now you're turning the European Defence Union into an annex of the United States, and there are others in the past, including Kissinger, who were against de Nouer. And since Adenauer, we've not been able to talk about Franco-German issues. We are looking at a dynamism of independence, and what we have now is a case of dependence on Germany and mutualization. When it comes to security and defense, we have to build up this Gaullian vision of European independence together with the United States within the United Nations in a world that is now multipolar. Otherwise, the Europe of defense will be a failure. Mr. Lewandowski for 2 minutes.
Dziękuję.
Yes, thank you very much, President. We're talking about the cooperation in the area of security defence at PESCO, and we're also talking about Brexit negotiations, and I would like to congratulate Michel Barnier and his team. So these are the two main issues we're addressing here. I have my opinion on this, and I would also like to address the social pillar, which is also on the agenda of the European Council meeting, and this goes back to the Gothenburg summit in the 17th of November. There are other main challenges such as migration, terrorism, defence, and I think those are going to be areas to fight with the populists rather than the area of the economy, because the economy is doing quite well. We have the social pillar. We're looking at proportionality, cohesion, mutual respect of different aspects. And there are certain areas where perhaps we can't fulfill everything at the level of the European Union. We want to try and strengthen the Erasmus program, look at qualifications, teachers. We want to promote mobility of students and teachers around the European Union. But there are certain reasons why the term social pillar leads to one or two fears in certain countries, especially in the East, because it also goes hand in hand sometimes with the concept of social dumping, and it means tough and hard regulation. And this takes us back to the idea of the Polish plumber, who was seen as a great threat during the time of the French referendum. And now we have the lorry drivers who travel to Spain, or we have the builders working on building sites who are seen as stealing dream jobs, which is not true. So we have to take a look at the regulation that can do away with the grey areas, but we know that sometimes these are instruments for populists, and there are a lot of things we have to do still to properly fulfill the social pillar. Mr. Weidenholzer for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Once again, we've got a summit that has to deal with the most important pressing issues for Europe, refugee and migration policy, and the prediction is that we're not going to come up with an appropriate solution. The European Parliament in its most recent session set out a very good way of reforming the Dublin system to make sure that we can stop what's going on and create a new direction. Finally, we need the courage to start negotiations. And maybe we'll see the miracle of Christmas. At least one problem can be addressed in the short term, as is always the case. N,000 refugees who are the victims of traffickers, and they're coming to a Europe which is freezing in winter, and hopefully we can meet our obligations for the UNHCR.
Mr. Nicholson for 1 minute.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. I welcome the fact that we have now the opportunity to move on from phase one. While we should not underestimate the difficulties that lie ahead, we now have a real opportunity to agree a deep and comprehensive deal between the United Kingdom and the European Union. It has always been the case that the best way to find solutions to the question of the border between the United Kingdom and the European Union is to discuss the trade and customs arrangements. None of us want to return to the borders of the past, but equally I cannot tolerate anything, nor accept, that would create an internal UK east-west border. The United Kingdom is by far Northern Ireland's most important single market, and that must not be jeopardised. And that, Mr Barnier, I believe, is the challenge to achieve. The UK and the EU now have an opportunity to agree on a deal that works for all parties, that can only be achieved if we work together and with cool heads. Let us move on from the grandstanding and the megaphone diplomacy in some parts of this debate. It is time for that, for sure, not for the future.
Monsieur Proust, vous avez 2 minutes.
Mr. Proust, you have 2 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Last week, a healthy compromise was put together between the EU and the UK. This first stage in the negotiation isn't an end in itself, but it's a clarification. A good deal, however, remains to be done. I'd like to pay tribute to the work carried out by the Commission under Michel Barnier. Despite the fact that there's a lot of clarity and a lot of failure to prepare properly on the UK side, we've managed to put together a timetable and protect our red lines, and I'd like once again, as I say, to express my gratitude for what they've done. So we now know what's on the table. Protect the rights of UK citizens in the EU and EU citizens in the UK, sort out the final payment issues, and no hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. No divorce is good, of course, but let's try and look at the positives here. The sovereign choice of the people of the UK has served as a shock to act as a reality check for the European Union, and we need to get together and make certain that the second phase of negotiations is a stage which serves the interest of Europe. When it comes to trade, for example, we need to be careful in strategic sectors. At a time when the UK will want to reassert itself as a trading power throughout the world, it shouldn't be a Trojan horse for foreign investment. And on our side, we need to keep the faith. I tried to have a report dealing with foreign investment, and we need to reform our anti-dumping methodology and reform our trade defence instruments. This is, of course, an unprecedented situation. There's still a long way to go. But let's not lower our guard. Let's continue to stand up for the interests of Europeans in a practical but determined fashion. Thank you.
Mrs. Valenciano, for 1 minute. Thank you, President. I would like to refer to the unacceptable document on migration that has been submitted by President Donald Tusk for the purposes of discussion at the European Council. In my country, we say if you can't see something, then basically it means that you can't feel something with your heart. But I think really we ought to, in the case of Mr. Tusk, he neither has a heart nor is he listening properly. He's not listening to our discussion, nor is he heeding the efforts being made by the Commission. The Council still is on a path towards working towards solving these problems, which seems to try and prevent legal paths, legal routes for migration. And this is a path, a route, which has proved to be erroneous on many occasions. And Donald Tusk is insisting on this in his document. And obviously this is to the detriment of European values. And then, of course, people are surprised that European populism is winning the battle. Thank you. Mr. González Pons, 2 minutes.
Felicidades, señor.
Well done, Mr. Barnier, on your work, and well done for having carried out the most transparent set of negotiations in history. We've agreed to divorce, and now we need to talk about how we can keep an open relationship in the future. We've agreed that citizens' rights should be protected under law, and that our law will be incorporated directly into UK law. And for 8 years, the ECJ will be able to create case law and rule on these matters. We need to make certain this is reasonable, and that there are 3 rules. No one should pay more than they're paying now, that the commitments entered into will be complied with, and that the UK won't pay any more than if it were a member of the EU. On the question of Northern Ireland, even that we've committed ourselves to respecting the Good Friday Agreements, the territorial integrity of the UK, and of the single market. That's going to be very difficult. We're going to have to work really hard because all of us need to back the Irish government position all the way until this statement is completely sorted out. During the transition period, the UK will remain part of the customs union and the single market, respecting the 4 freedoms, but it won't be able to take part in decisions taken by the European Union. So what's left to do is the most difficult thing: sort out the technical details of this political agreement, see how long the transition period lasts and what its scope will be, and start negotiating a trade agreement. This agreement isn't the end of anything. This is just the beginning of everything. It's a political agreement with a lot of things that still remain to be done, and Mr. Barnier will have to negotiate them and sort them out. We've done the easy part, Mr. Barnier. Unfortunately now for you, you've got the most difficult part, because as usual the success will be measured by having a Brexit which doesn't look like a Brexit. Thank you.
The floor now for Mrs. Bresso for 1 minute.
Grazie Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President. I too would like to congratulate Mr. Barnier, our negotiator, for the splendid result he's achieved. But I'd like to come back to other issues which have been raised this morning. The Council, for example, will have to approve the first package on the social dimension of the EU, education and culture, after the Gothenburg meeting, and I'm pleased that Council's made progress, although we're a long way short of what we would have liked here. A large raft of measures have been put together on the Eurozone. It's good that Parliament should be the Parliament of the Eurozone. It's nice for people to say this, but there's still a democratic issue here. In all of these areas, the question of defence and defence cooperation and the role of the Parliament there is important. This is not something which isn't on an equal footing with Council.
Mr. Kelly for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone on behalf of Ireland, especially the 2 Presidents, Juncker and Tusk, Mr. Barnier for Verhofstadt, and everyone else. As Donald Tusk said, we should all work together, and we showed that.
The Irish people are very happy at the practical and sensible agreement announced last Friday. The protection of the Good Friday Agreement in all its parts, the preservation of the common travel area, and above all, no hard border and full regulatory alignment to make that happen, which can be worked out in phase 2. And also, which hasn't been mentioned enough, the willingness of the European Union to continue peace and Interreg funding into the future post-Brexit. And mentioning peace, we do not want a hard border because there has been too much bloodshed spilt in Ireland over the border. A bloody civil war and 20 years of terror. Nobody wants to go back to that, and thanks to Mr. Barnier, the Irish government, and indeed Theresa May, that will not happen. Finally, I would like to say also to Theresa May, we appreciate her efforts in difficult circumstances to progress matters. Hopefully she will get the backing of all her colleagues, because this is not a time for disunity. We in Ireland are totally united, the European Union is totally united, and those in the United Kingdom have to stand behind Theresa May. It's not helpful when people make statements that commitments are only statements of intent. A commitment is a commitment, a guarantee is a guarantee, and nothing else. Finally, I would tell her that there's an old Irish phrase also which says, "It's been bail in a hust."
Silence is golden.
It is the mouth that is silent. She may, in her wisdom, teach some of her colleagues that old adage.
1 minute maintenant pour
1 minute for Mr. Gaia.
Merci, Madame.
In French, thank you. In German. Congratulations, Mr. Barnier, on the result of these negotiations that you have presented today. as Deputy Chair of the Budget Committee, I wanted to make sure that the result of Brexit wouldn't have too much a great impact on the budget, because their contributions have to be made. And we needed to make sure we could continue the multi-annual framework, financial framework, and also that the UK would still provide contributions to officials' pensions, and that as long as they're part of the European Union they would carry on paying here. And there are of course citizens from the UK who would be affected by that. But it also means that some of the nonsense we've heard about bottles of wine and pieces of land that need to be sold off for that case has now been dropped. Of course there's a question of both sides being weakened by this. In Article 73 of the joint agreement we see that there's some very clear text there to make sure that we need to cover our bases on the budget. 1 minute for Mr. Rangel.
Thank you very much, Madam President. First of all, I'd like to say how totally irritated I am by the way that President Tusk has approached the problem of refugees. It's quite unacceptable for a community under the rule of law which defends human rights and is a vital, important beacon for fundamental rights to treat refugees in this way. This is deplorable. We should reject this. We agree with the Commission and President Juncker on this. I'd also like to pay tribute to Michel Barnier for the way he's achieved, the results he's achieved, protecting the rights of European citizens, and of course including British citizens who live in the EU outside the UK. Also a message for David Davis.
Even gentlemen's agreements were binding. Esta é a mensagem que eu queria deixar.
That's my message. Even gentlemen's agreements are binding in part of a negotiation between institutions such as the UK government and the European Commission and the European Council. Thank you.
Mr.
Dance, 1 minute.
I'm grateful to Mr Verhofstadt for his clarification that the Phase 1 agreement will be put into a legal text. This is very important news, particularly for citizens, of course, who need the assurances going forward. But let's be clear about the situation that we find ourselves in. The reason that the fantasists opposite have been able to claim, as they often do, that this is a betrayal is because the government's own rhetoric is wildly different from the reality that we face. You cannot have a hard border in Ireland and preserve the peace process. You cannot have a hard border in the Irish Sea and preserve the four nations and the integrity of the United Kingdom. This is integral to Brexit. And the full alignment that was agreed under Phase 1 will of course mean the following: that decisions on Britain's trade and economic policy will be made in this House and in the European institutions, where we currently have a voice and where we will have none because of Brexit. And it's up to the proponents opposite to explain to their constituents how that is taking back control. It is not taking back control, it is ceding it.
Mr. Schöpflin.
Mr. Schöpflin, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. When the history of Brexit comes to be written, one aspect of it is bound to play a prominent role: the quality of the communication between London and Brussels, especially in the media. Now, communication may be the wrong word. Miscommunication might be better. The Council mandate of the 29th of April is crystal clear on what the EU expected from the United Kingdom. Yet the British media have treated the negotiations as if they had never read Council's mandate. Who knows, maybe there is no as if about it. Certainly, much of the British media comment has reflected a very different mindset about Brexit, one in which the EU's position has played next to no role. It's bizarre. The UK is constantly trumpeting diversity and multiculturalism. Evidently, the EU, Brussels, the European Parliament, the 27 are not a part of this diversity.
Mr.
Pizzula, 1 minute.
Merci, Madam President. Brexit će dominirati ovo tjednim sastankom, to jest...
Thank you, President. Brexit is going to be the issue that dominates the meeting, i.e. whether we really have made sufficient progress to move towards the second phase. We can agree with the joint declaration from last week, but we feel that the challenges, the stakes are far greater. Hopefully progress in the second phase will move forward more swiftly. As a Croatian MEP, I'm very happy to see the provision that says that the Croatian citizens will be on the same level as other European citizens and have their rights respected. And I also welcome the strengthening of cooperation in the field of security and defence. I also welcome the fact that Donald Tusk has invited all member states all leaders to the Eurozone summit. These are not the only subjects which are important for the European Union. I'm happy to see that culture, education and social issues are also on the agenda.
Děkuji za udělení slova, kolegyně a kolegové. Evropská rada by měla podpořit vyjednávání.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, the European Council should support the Brexit negotiations as they've been presented here today, especially when it comes to security for citizens, because they are unsure of what's going to happen. The UK is not speaking with one voice, but the EU is, and that's our advantage and our strength. I would find it good if the Council accepted Mr. Tusk's position on solving the migration crisis. He spoke his mind, and I wanted to call on Mr. Timmermans as well, because he said the European Union member states need to strike a balance between security and solidarity. Mr. Timmermans, you said that securing the borders and fighting the traffickers have to be our priorities. I would concur. The member states do show solidarity. They have shown responsibility, and this solution has to be a common one. At the same time, it needs to respect the situation of the member states. And I think Mr. Tusk was saying the same thing. Subsidiarity is not something that we can just ignore. Ms. Perez, 1 minute.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Barnier, Chief Negotiator, thank you for having at least mentioned the previously unmentionable, the internal market, in paragraph, I think, 49, in this document, which I think we'll be able to build upon as far as future relations between the EU and the UK are concerned. But there are other issues on the agenda of the Council. I'm very surprised that the Commission is not sitting in its appointed chair, because I would have liked to have stressed to them the importance of EMU reforms, even if we don't have a German government that's more than a caretaker one at the moment, because there are elements where we need to make progress, particularly on the idea of a safety net for the resolutions fund, which might threaten progress, which we need to look at no matter what the electoral calendars are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At many British tables, I think, Christmas lunch 2017 will be surrounded still by uncertainty. First and foremost for the European citizens and their families, and indeed, like many colleagues have said, more guarantees are needed here. But also economically, as the BBC reported that this same Christmas lunch will this year be 20% more expensive due to Brexit-induced inflation and price volatility. So yes, let's talk about trade. That's also in the interest of our producers, our farmers, our fishermen. But let's be clear, access to the single market is not free. You can't have your cake and eat it. And finally, now that I'm in the Christmas spirit anyway, let me warn this House also against false prophets, like the Brexit prophet Nigel Farage, who through nonsense, lies and videotape got his Brexit and then ran away. He talks about unelected bureaucrats, but he betrayed his voters. And indeed, now he's absent. He had his videotape, he will put his intervention on all the social media, but let's promise our voters and our citizens one thing. The work in this House will have to be done by serious, maybe less flamboyant politicians, and that's us. So when we reconvene after Christmas, let's get to work in the interest of the European citizens and also the Brits. Thank you.
Mr. Panzeri, 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. for a while now, curious things have been happening in debates like this. Council always seems a bit reluctant. The Commission comes out with very grandiose speeches. They often get applauded, but it seems almost like a cry in the dark. The Brexit issue means that we're not looking enough at some of the other issues, Gothenburg, the social pillar, but it might just be empty promises unless it's backed up by rules and resources, and I can't see that happening so far. Dublin, the situation in Libya is getting worse and worse, and now the Council President said that the European migratory policy has failed. I don't see how a Council can explain to European citizens about that when it looks at what it's done, and what it's done has been very feeble as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Hökmark.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Michel Barnier for having achieved sufficient progress in the negotiations. Now we need to go on further with the aim of a friendly Brexit negotiated with the government of the United Kingdom, not undermined by the political forces here who are not even represented in the British Parliament. They are not only trying to undermine the negotiations, they are undermining the United Kingdom's potential in the future. Second, when the US gets smaller, we need to get taller. We need to develop new trade relations in order to support not only economic development but also strengthen a liberal world order. We need to secure that we can have the strength in developing the European Union, not just by discussing form, but securing that we have the right policies that can make our union strong. Thank you.
Pour une minute, Madame Kammerevert.
Mrs. Kammerevert for 1 minute.
Yes, thank you very much, President. I would like to say something about education policy, which I feel deserves far more attention than it's got to the up till now. At the Gothenburg summit, the Commission thankfully proposed a creation of a European education area between now and 2025. But these promises now have to be put into practice, and with all due respect for the powers of the Member States, what would speak against Member States actually coming together to set common, ambitious, binding targets for education and making the necessary money available, for example, for learning language, lifelong learning, to acquire modern key skills, including digital skills? These objectives obviously are going to have to be closely evaluated, because education is the future, and investment in education is investment in the future of people, and that it is high time that we actually recognise all of this in our common political behaviour. Obviously, we're going to have to move swiftly towards this to try and set up a common education area before 2025, and I would ask the Member States to make their contribution to this as well.
18 months of political denial, the UK has finally accepted the 3 divorce conditions. And now everybody knows what Brexit really means. Brexiters promised £350 million a week to their citizens. Instead, they have to pay billions of euros. They promised economic benefits. Instead, the pound and the British growth are at their lowest. They promised sovereignty. Instead, the government is at the mercy of DUP at home and of trade partners abroad. They promised global Britain. Instead, they got a lonely Britain. They promised to take back control. Instead, they are spinning out of control. I am saddened that British people have fallen victim to political crooks, and that the result is a divided and weakened UK. Fortunately, the European family is united after the Brexit wake-up call, and fortunately the citizens' problems found a positive solution in the first part of these negotiations. Thank you, Michel Barnier.
Madame Costa,
Madame Costa, 1 minute.
Grazie Presidente. Nel ringraziare Timmermans e Barnier,
Thank you very much. Brexit has been a dramatic moment for many young people. They have discovered the advantages of European citizenship and being part of Europe. It's important that the EU UK agreement specifically protects young people and students and those involved in European programmes. And the challenge of immigration is another issue. I think Tusk has spoken out of turn. We need to have a new relationship with the other side of the Mediterranean, whereby Africans, young people, are the protagonists. And we need to pay heed to the conclusions of the Gothenburg Social Summit and what was said about culture, allowing young people to study elsewhere, to have networks, multilingual courses, and the European Student Card and Erasmus for young artists from 2020, and a creative element to EFSI. Thank you.
Ms. Fayon, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Now, before New Year and new plans, it's time for positive energy and optimism. This is why I'm talking with a great deal of trust in our European Union and the wish that European citizens regain trust in the EU as well. Citizens want more of Europe when it comes to security, physical, economic or social security. So providing security is increasingly linked to policies with member states' competence, such as social care and health care. And also security is very much tied to migration management. This all results from changing demographics in Europe and the world, and we have to find common European solutions in the next few years. We can only feel safe in an environment respecting democratic standards when we listen to individuals, and an environment with solidarity. So this is our greatest challenge, primary challenge. We have to preserve fundamental values and live in line with these values. So please, dear leaders, respect these standards as we will.
Now we move to... Lots of people are asking for...
La parole est à Madame McGuinness pour ce challenge.
Mrs. McGuinness, first of all.
Thank you, President. I shall try and set a good example. I want to say, Michel Barnier, a thank you, not from me, but from the people I represent, from those people who live in Donegal, in Louth, in Cavan, in Monaghan, in Leitrim, the counties that border Northern Ireland, but also to the people of Armagh, Fermanagh, Tyrone and Derry, who link up with my constituents socially, from a business point of view, and who see no invisible border and want no visible border. You, through your patience and determination, have secured for them a future which they were very fearful of. And sometimes in this House, those who grandstand and arrive in and make great speeches walk out and ignore the realities of what we are talking about here today. What happens will impact on people on the ground, and I hope that going into Christmas we have given them more reassurances, not just around the Ireland issue, but on citizens' rights and financial commitments. But it took your courage and determination, Michel. Have a good Christmas. You did hard work.
Monsieur Lopez Aguilar.
Mr. Lucas, for 1 minute. Madam President, the December meeting of the Council has a very heavy agenda. The Brexit negotiations, the structured cooperation and defence, has been called the Sleeping Beauty. But surely Cinderella is the name that applies to the way they've dealt with the crisis. But in terms of palpable results, in terms of decent jobs and renewing opportunities for young people, including the Erasmus programme that Manolo Marin, the former Spanish Commissioner who recently died, launched. All this has to be done, but migration is very much a black mark on the Council's work. They're focusing on return of migrants who are seen constantly as a threat. We need legal channels, humanitarian visas and humanitarian channels, particularly in North Africa. This is the only way we can restore free movement of people in the Schengen area, which was a wonderful asset to European citizens. Mr. Marias. Thank you very much, Madam President. The European Council cannot close its eyes to the migration problem and can't leave
Greece and Italy as a storeroom for people, and we have to get rid of obligatory quotas for the distribution of refugees. That has to be dealt with. We need rules so that we can have solidarity, and member states in which migrants first appear aren't overburdened. The policy of the European Union must be changed, because we have a European Central Bank which provides loans, but the system of the European Central Bank must be decentralized. Sovereignty in monetary policy must be re-established in the member states. When it comes to participation in the capital of the European Central Bank, we must have new rules. We have a Stability and Growth Pact. We need a strengthening of social Europe.
Chair, I'm missing Mr. Farage. I wanted to appreciate the most pro-EU speech he has ever made in this House. Very much appreciated. In fact, he praised the European Union. Two remarks. As concerns Mr. Barnier, the negotiations, congratulations, but there is really one issue that I would appreciate if you would take into account in the EPC resolution, and that is on the status of citizens, because it still is, from a procedural point of view, giving insecurity to EU citizens. I think that it should be pure registration, and the burden of proof should be on the European Parliament. On the United Kingdom. The second remark I would have on the euro. I really would appreciate that the summit makes an important step to a better governance in the eurozone. You might ask why a Czech is making such an emphasis. Because I, for once, would like to show to the Czech citizens, to Czech politicians, that there is no reason for an excuse of bad governance in the eurozone, so that we would have a serious debate on the introduction of euro in the Czech Republic. Thank you.
Mr.
Papadimos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to immigration, Mr. Tusk's discourse is provocative, unacceptable and anti-European. It's not a question of obligatory quotas. It's the document that's unacceptable. The President of the Council, Mr. Tusk, is absent today, and I thought that Mr. Kaczynski or Mr. Orban had signed this, not Mr. Tusk, President of the Council. The Commission has taken the governments which refused to comply with their obligations to the Court of Justice. They were supported by the Parliament, and it's unacceptable for the President of the Council to attack the Commission on this. Greece and Italy cannot bear the burden of immigration alone.
Mr. Epitideos.
Madam President. Η ολοκλήρωση της πρώτης φάσης των διαπραγματεύσεων για...
Thank you, Madam President. I believe that the completion of the first phase of the basic negotiations has shown that it's the citizens of the European Union living with their families in the UK who are going to be at the receiving end of the deal. As things stand now, they've every reason to be concerned about their future and their rights. Will they actually be guaranteed? Mr. Barnier has told us that they will be guaranteed throughout their lives, but no one can provide us with a solid reassurance that that will actually hold true. The role of the European Court of Justice will be reduced, and so we can't know whether any government in the future might seek to curtail their rights. The European Union must provide unwavering support for the rights of those people. It would be a tragic state of affairs if they are denied the right to stay in their own homes.
Thank you for the floor, Chair. Three things I would like to mention. First, Brexit. Thank you, Mr. Barnier, for very good negotiation management, and thank you that you put citizenship rights before lobbyists and vested interests of member states, etc. Then the second topic, migration. I'm sure that leaders will talk about it. I would like to point out Donald Tusk's letter. He says that obligatory quotas are not the best solution because they are dividing European public. He also defended more positive strategies in resolving this problem. And TESCO, no common European policy has had such support as the European Security and Defence Union. So I'm glad that leaders will talk about that as well.
Thank you, Madam President. I note the statements made by Mr. Timmermans on the future of the European Union. Unfortunately, the fine delegations come up against budgetary questions. How can we put in place all these new policies without additional financing? We can accept that on structural policies in the EU, on Brexit, I'd like to thank Mr. Barnier and all the negotiators for not giving in on the red lines of the Parliament. I understand that the road ahead is long to put this first result into practice legally. There's one point which bothers me, is the Irish border. I don't know how things will happen and which solution will emerge. What I wish is that it doesn't threaten peace or the future. I think, despite what Mr. Farage said, that the UK will be banging on the EU's door again.
Pani Przewodnicząca, Panie i Panowie Posłowie, to była dzisiaj naprawdę pasjonująca.
Thank you very much. This has been a very interesting debate today, and it presages a very interesting European Council. But we can see what is going on, the attacks on the President of the European Council, I think, show that if someone is stating the obvious, they come under attack from all sides. And I'm surprised that Mr. Tusk's friends don't defend him, leaving aside the obligatory allocation of migrant quotas, which doesn't work. When it comes to right of asylum, that is a member state competence. No one has the right to force Muslim brothers upon people.
Doubted positives that have come out of the Phase 1 negotiations when it comes to Ireland. Commitments to no border, regulatory alignment, commitments on citizens' rights, all positive. And your statement, Mr. Barnier, there will be no going back, that's definitely a positive. But there is one thing that will drive this back, and that is triumphalism on either side. And in particular for people like Manfred WEBER. I fear that his dislike of the UK is what drives him, rather than his love for Ireland. And I think it's love for Ireland that should drive it instead, because this is very important to us. When we talk about ties with Great Britain, I don't think people understand here how important it is. It isn't about dependence, it's about codependence. I'm a Flanagan, my wife is a Kelly. My mother and my wife's mother, there was 20 in the two families. 19 out of the 20 of them went to work in London. 3 out of the 6 of my siblings were born in London. We need each other, we depend on each other, we work together. Manfred, remember that with your triumphalism. It doesn't bloody well help.
Mr. Hayes.
Mr. Hayes.
President, I rise to thank the 26 member states of the European Union, Michel Barnier and his team, and all of the institutions for their support for Ireland over the course of this negotiation. This has been a successful negotiation where we have stayed clear and we have come together, and we are stronger together. And on behalf of my constituents in Ireland, we thank you for that solidarity and that support. The clear message from this debate, as demonstrated by Mr. Barnier, is that there is no going back on the commitments that have been entered by the EU and the United Kingdom. No going back on the clear commitments for Ireland, no going back on the clear two other priority issues for EU citizens' rights and the question of finance. But we have a duty now to reposition this debate, to go forward together. We need a new relationship with the United Kingdom, based on mutual respect, based on cooperation. But just as Europe has stayed loyal to Ireland, so too will Ireland stay loyal on the question of the integrity of the single market. Thank you.
Monsieur Caputo.
Mr. Caputo.
Thank you, Madam President. The agreement on Brexit at this stage shows that it's not such a great deal. The economic crisis since 2008 is something that the whole of Europe has been trying to cope with ever since. And it's seen Europe being blamed for everything, even things it's not responsible for. But who's benefited from the problems of the European Union? Those who, without shouldering responsibility, have managed to kid the voters that on its own the UK could have chosen its own destiny, even in a globalised world. But the facts point in a different direction. This choice is a leap into the dark for the UK with no long-term project. Nonetheless, the European Union unites, it doesn't divide. We must leave a door open for when the British people decide to return. When the populists start fighting with one another, as Farage has already started to fall out with his colleague Mrs May.
We'll
conclude the Catch the Eye, Ms Cathy.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I believe we have results, and we should not ignore them. We should look towards what unites us rather than looking at what divides us. We need to think about what has remained undone. And Brexit is something which is a failure for us. I would like to congratulate the negotiators of Parliament and of the Commission. I think that they have achievements, they have results. And today we need to think about Brexit in terms of the citizens. There shouldn't be an additional burden. There shouldn't be discrimination of the European citizens. We have Romanians living in the UK, and it is the duty of the UK to look after them. And we need to think what we do next year in order to increase social cohesion. The most important objective for us is to help European farmers, small enterprises, and help and support citizens. Thank you. This is European policy.
So you have 1 minute. Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Barnier, I have a practical question on Cyprus. We have large military zones controlled by the UK, where there are thousands of citizens, European citizens living, Cypriots or Europeans from other member states. I'd like to know what will be the future of these European citizens. What will be their status, their life? What will be their rights and their obligations? We'll have the Sakharov Prize in a few moments. I'd like to take this occasion to salute a monument of human dignity. I would not like to weaken the prestige of those who will receive the prize. The Turkish prisoners have a message that we should all listen to. Demirtas, who concludes in his statement that with the Erdogan regime there is no justice in Turkey. I will now pass over to Mr. Barnier. There will be a little bit of noise with colleagues coming into the hemicycle.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I will try and be precise and quick all of you who commented on other issues other than Brexit, whether the economy, immigration, education, social and economic issues. Obviously, I will pass on your comments to President Juncker and First Vice President Mr. Timmermans. We're not able to be here. So very briefly, Manfred Weber just now talked about transition. Let me confirm that the only legal basis for a possible transition is Article 50. There's no transition if there is no agreement on Article 50, the withdrawal agreement. I'd also like to thank Esteban González Pons for using the word transparency. This is key to trust between us. It's key for the Council as well, and we will continue working with Guy Verhofstadt and the members of the Brexit steering group, and we will have an ongoing dialogue based on trust. On Ireland, Seán Kelly and Mairead McGuinness and other members recalled how sensitive this issue is. We will continue. I will continue to work with the Irish government and the other 26. The unity of the 27 in the past and in the months to come is absolutely fundamental. I listened carefully to Mrs. in 't Veld, Ska KELLER and others who mentioned citizens' rights, like Roberto GUALTIERI and Guy Verhofstadt, who has made the point very forcefully. A couple of points. First of all, free movement. In the future, Mrs. in 't Veld, this is part of the future stage, stage 2. I will not forget this issue. There's a very important point on the procedures. That's a sensitive issue. In the joint report, we've laid down very precise conditions which have been co-signed by both sides, and I will make sure that these conditions go into the withdrawal treaty itself. The procedures need to be straightforward, with as little red tape as possible. We haven't reached the end on this matter. It will only be finally done in the withdrawal agreement. The European Parliament's vigilance is justified. Just a word on Cyprus. We do need to find specific solutions to maintain the current situation of citizens affected by life around the 2 military bases. I say that this just in passing. Gianni PITTELLA, Guy Verhofstadt and Elmar Brok mentioned the strength of this joint report. It is really serious work we've done together. It's methodical and precise. This will be at the basis of what we are going to put into law via a draft treaty. And the aim is to get it on the table by the end of January. It will be supported by the content of the joint report. As Elmar Brok said, it's a matter of trust. The word trust is more than just a word between the UK and ourselves. We cannot build a future relationship when it comes to defence and security, judicial cooperation, universities, trade and so on without trust.
About the context of these negotiations. They are difficult. They are tough, very tough, because the issues are extremely complicated, and because the consequences of the Brexit are very serious. I personally want to say, in response to a number of comments, that Prime Minister Theresa May is courageous and respectable, and I certainly respect her. Je voudrais dire maintenant.
And now, as Syed KAMALL and Gabriele ZIMMER mentioned, we have to consider in a future relationship that with this agreement on the joint report, an important step has been taken in the direction of an orderly withdrawal, and And this will be via a treaty which will be submitted to you. You will have the last word, and this will build a future relationship. And I would just like to stress one point. And I mean, this is the first time in European trade negotiations that in a trade relationship we have to negotiate and work on dealing with divergence rather than encouraging convergence. We will have to deal with regulatory divergence and stop it becoming a tool for dumping rather than moving towards convergence. This is a very important point. It affects the very way of life mentioned by Manfred WEBER. And it's an issue of the level playing field as well. So this is a real leitmotif, Mrs. Beres, in our joint report, as Danuta Hübner so rightly said. Mayor Rodriguez and Daniel Gasperi mentioned the need for reform of Europe. Others mentioned this as well. Let me state once again that the future of Europe is based need for reform is based on a willingness to move forward. This is where our efforts need to go, this reform agenda. Thank you very much for all the attention you've paid to our work. I am not smug or triumphalist, but I will share your words of appreciation with all my team, and the Parliament's team, the Council team, all deserve this appreciation. Let me finish in English.
Calm and continue.
To conclude, for the Council, Mr. Maasikas.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Dear members, I thank you for all your comments that you made during this discussion this morning, and I will convey them to the President of the European Council. One observation from me, though. We have, during the last 18 months, we have successfully avoided Brexit negotiations so skillfully conducted by Michel Barnier. We have avoided these negotiations overshadowing the EU's other daily work for our citizens, for our businesses' sake. It's good. There is a slight similarity when I hear this discussion this morning in this House. A similarity with a wider topic on migration, to be discussed by our leaders later this week. It is clear to everybody that solutions to the migration crisis can only be comprehensive. There can only be European solutions. And this is the spirit of leaders' discussions this week, as it is clear from the letter of President Tusk, if you read it in full. So let us not let this one line in President Tusk's letter overshadow the wide content of leaders' discussions or prejudge its results. Let us not overshadow all the Union's achievements in the field of defence, social, education, culture, digital, etc., that will be on the European Council agenda later this week. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for concluding this debate at 11:59. I have received motions for resolution, and we will continue with the Sakharov Prize in just a few moments.
Dont les journalistes sont tués.
This has happened in my own country.
Je prends ici la parole qu'on me confisque dans mon pays.
Kosovo se trouve dans une situation extrêmement dramatique. do centro de poder democrático.
Cargos electos no nacionalistas son asesinados.
A sustained dialogue of tolerance.
Andrei Saharov al pueblo de Cuba.
The situation is all the more tragic.
На свободную, нецензурированную.
It has to be reformed and it has to be reviewed.
Эта премия так само молодых лидеров.
Gives me the opportunity to speak to you.
状态就是说警察围困的状态。
Чечни вообще на Северном Кавказе.
Cuando va a permitir la libertad. The specter of war is haunting our world.
Still, there is hope.
C'est dramatique, il faut que ça s'arrête.
يتفكك تحت ثقل الإبادة.
The fear of the power of the white man.
Своим революционным погибом отворили.
En estos momentos históricos para Europa.
Que fueron los primeros que lucharon por la libertad.
Dont les journalistes sont tués.
This has happened in my own country.
这完全是因为很多的朋友的帮助。
Je prends ici la parole qu'on me confisque dans mon pays.
Kosovo se trouve dans une situation extrêmement dramatique.
Do centro de poder democrático.
Cargos electos no nacionalistas son asesinados.
A sustained dialogue of tolerance.
Andrei Saharov al pueblo de Cuba.
The situation is all the more tragic.
На свободную, нецензурированную.
It has to be reformed and it has to be reviewed.
Эта премия так само молодых лидеров.
Gives me the opportunity to speak to you.
状态就是说警察围困的状态。
Чечни вообще на Северном Кавказе.
Cuando va a permitir la libertad. The specter of war is haunting our world.
Still, there is hope.
C'est dramatique, il faut que ça s'arrête.
يتفكك تحت ثقل الإبادة.
The fear of the power of the white man.
Своим революционным погибом отворили.
En estos momentos históricos para Europa.
Que fueron los primeros que lucharon por la libertad.
Journal dont les journalistes sont tués.
This has happened in my own country.
这完全是因为很多的朋友的帮助。
Je prends ici la parole qu'on me confisque dans mon pays.
Kosovo se trouve dans une situation extrêmement dramatique.
Do centro de poder democrático.
Cargos electos no nacionalistas son asesinados.
A sustained dialogue of tolerance.
Andrei Saharov al pueblo de Cuba.
The situation is all the more tragic.
На свободную, нецензурированную.
It has to be reformed and it has to be reviewed.
Эта премия так само молодых лидеров.
Gives me the opportunity to speak to you.
状态就是说警察围困的状态。
Чечни вообще на Северном Кавказе.
Cuando va a permitir la libertad. The specter of war is haunting our world.
Still, there is hope.
C'est dramatique, il faut que ça s'arrête.
يتفكك تحت ثقل الإبادة.
The fear of the power of the white man.
Своим революционным погибом отворили.
En estos momentos históricos para Europa.
Que fueron los primeros que lucharon por la libertad.
Journal dont les journalistes sont tués.
This has happened in my own country.
这完全是因为很多的朋友的帮助。
Je prends ici la parole qu'on me confisque dans mon pays.
Kosovo se trouve dans une situation extrêmement dramatique.
Do centro de poder democrático.
Cargos electos no nacionalistas son asesinados.
A sustained dialogue of tolerance.
Andrei Saharov al pueblo de Cuba.
The situation is all the more tragic.
На свободную, нецензурированную.
It has to be reformed and it has to be reviewed.
Эта премия так само молодых лидеров.
Gives me the opportunity to speak to you.
状态就是说警察围困的状态。
Чечни вообще на Северном Кавказе.
Cuando va a permitir la libertad. The specter of war is haunting our world.
Still, there is hope.
C'est dramatique, il faut que ça s'arrête.
يتفكك تحت ثقل الإبادة.
fear of the power of the white man.
Своим революционным погибом отворило
que fueron los primeros que lucharon por la libertad.
journal dont les journalistes sont tués.
This has happened in my own country.
Je prends ici la parole qu'on me confisque dans mon pays.
Kosovo se trouve dans une situation extrêmement dramatique. No centro de poder democrático. Cargos electos no nacionalistas son asesinados. Sustained dialogue of tolerance.
Andrei Saharov al pueblo de Cuba.
The situation is all the more tragic.
На свободную, нецензурированную.
It has to be reformed and it has to be reviewed.
Это премия так само молодых лидеров. Gives me the opportunity to speak to you.
状态就是说警察围困的状态。
В Чечне, вообще на Северном Кавказе. Cuando vas a permitir las libertades. The specter of war is haunting our world.
Still, there is hope.
C'est dramatique, il faut que ça s'arrête.
يتفكك تحت ثقل الإبادة.
Que fueron los primeros que lucharon por la libertad.
Journal dont les journalistes sont tués.
This has happened in my own country.
Je prends ici la parole qu'on me confisque dans mon pays.
Kosovo se trouve dans une situation extrêmement dramatique. No centro de poder democrático. Cargos electos no nacionalistas son asesinados. A sustained dialogue of tolerance.
Andrei Saharov al pueblo de Cuba.
The situation is all the more tragic.
На свободную, нецензурированную.
It has to be reformed and it has to be reviewed.
Это премия так само молодых лидеров. Gives me the opportunity to speak to you.
状态就是说警察围困的状态。
В Чечне, вообще на Северном Кавказе. Cuando vas a permitir las libertades. The specter of war is haunting our world.
Still, there is hope.
C'est dramatique, il faut que ça s'arrête.